Picture a woman standing over a basin of cold water in a two-room tenement in Bermondsey, London, 1887. The water is brown. The basin is cracked. She's holding a small piece of sponge on a string, soaking it in a solution of vinegar and water, and she is terrified. Not of the sponge, of what happens if she doesn't use it, of what has already happened because she didn't use it enough, of the third heartbeat she already suspects is growing inside her, right now, while she stands here, in a room that already holds 2 children, 1 husband who drinks on Fridays, 14 shillings a week coming in, and absolutely no room for 1 more mouth. That sponge is contraception. Victorian contraception. And this is the story of what women knew, what they were allowed to know, what they risked to know, and what they did in the dark to survive a world that had opinions about their bodies, but no interest in helping them manage them. Add to that a black market for pamphlets that could get you arrested for owning them. Add a chemist who sells certain things without saying what they are, and a midwife who does certain things without writing them down. Add the Malthusian League handing out information in court after being prosecuted for it, and a rubber goods shop in Holborn where the sign says surgical sundries and everyone knows exactly what that means. That's Victorian London, the largest city in the world, the capital of an empire that spans a quarter of the planet, a city where you could read John Stuart Mill on a Tuesday and watch your neighbour die of her 9th childbirth on a Wednesday. We are going back tonight, not as historians with footnotes, as the woman with the sponge. 1 day, 1 body, everything she would have touched, feared, sought, and survived. So, I make these history stories, and I genuinely do not know whether people listen to them to fall asleep or to feel slightly better about living in a century that at least has reliable contraception and doctors who believe women are capable of making decisions about their own reproduction. Either way, get comfortable, pull the blanket up, here we go. Your eyes open before dawn, not because you want them to. Your body has decided that sleep is finished, and it doesn't matter what you think about that because your body hasn't been asking your opinion about much lately. That's the problem, actually. That is the entire problem, distilled into one small biological fact. Your body does things, large, consequential things, and the world has very limited interest in helping you manage the consequences. The room is cold, cold in the way that January in Bermondsey is cold, which is different from the polite cold of a chilly drawing room in Mayfair. This is the cold that settles into brick walls and never quite leaves them, even in summer. The kind of cold that makes the blanket feel inadequate no matter how many times you pull it tighter. There's 1 blanket. There's also Thomas, asleep on his side facing the wall, and the heat from his body is the only reason you haven't frozen in the night. You lie still for a moment. These sounds come in layers. In the room next to this one, and it is not really a separate room, more a curtained-off section of the same room, the kind of architectural optimism that the landlord calls a second bedroom. You can hear Alfie breathing, 3 years old, deep, even, unconscious breathing that you've memorized because for the first 6 months of his life you woke every few minutes to listen for it. Convinced silence meant death. You know better now, mostly. Eleanor is quieter. 18 months. Sleeping in the drawer of the wardrobe that you padded with an old coat. She doesn't wake until almost 6 on good mornings. Today you are hoping will be a good morning. The sounds beyond the room. The building is full of people even at this hour. Footsteps from the floor above. Someone up early or still up late, hard to say. The couple in the room next door have a baby. The baby cries at intervals that feel almost rhythmic, like the city breathing. A dog somewhere outside. The clatter of a milk cart 2 streets over. The horse's hooves on cobblestones coming and going through the pre-dawn silence. And then the smell. You notice it before anything else these mornings, before you have even fully committed to being awake. It hits the back of your throat like a fist. Nausea. Not food-related, not illness. You know exactly what it is. You've felt it twice before. Once 3 years ago when Alfie was coming, once 18 months ago when Eleanor was coming, and now again, now, this particular cold January morning. It is back, and it has been back for 11 days, and you have been very carefully not thinking about what it means. The smell of the room doesn't help. Coal smoke from the fireplace in the corner, though the fire is out now and won't be lit again until you can get to it without disturbing the children. Underneath that damp wool, the smell of clothes drying on the chair by the window, never quite drying because the window faces north and the sun is brief and inadequate. The smell of chamber pot in the corner which needs emptying. The yeasty human smell of several people sleeping in a small space. Thomas smells of the tallow works where he spends 10 hours a day. A smell that gets into fabric and hair and never entirely leaves. You have been lying here for 11 days thinking you might be wrong. You are not wrong. You know you're not wrong the same way you knew the other 2 times, with a certainty that lives in the body and not in the mind, a kind of bone-deep recognition that something has changed. Your breasts ache. Your appetite is strange. Coffee, which you can barely afford anyway, turns your stomach. And the nausea. This specific, particular, morning nausea that does not care whether you have eaten or haven't, does not care whether you're lying down or standing, just announces itself every morning around 4:30 and does not leave until about 9. You lie there and breathe carefully through your nose. Thomas stirs once, settles, keeps sleeping. You think about the arithmetic of this. 14 shillings a week. That is Thomas's wage at the tallow works on Bermondsey Street, where they render down the fat of dead animals into tallow for candles and lubricants, and a dozen other things that require grease. It is not a good job. It is a hot, smell-soaked, back-breaking job. But it is a job. 3 shillings for rent, 2 and 6 for coal over the winter. That leaves 8 shillings and 6pence for everything else. Food for 4 people, shoes when the children's wear through, clothes when something tears beyond mending, medicine when someone is ill. There is no room in this arithmetic for a 3rd child. There's barely room for the 2 who already exist. You know this. Thomas knows this. The couple next door know this. The woman upstairs, who has 6 children and a husband who drinks on more days than Fridays, knows this better than anyone. Everyone knows. Nobody talks about it. That is the arrangement. The polite and comprehensive silence around the question of how many children you have and how many more are coming and what, if anything, anyone is doing about it. You get up before the children wake. The floorboard nearest the bed knows better than to creak. You found the quiet spots years ago. And you move to the fireplace, crouching in front of it, building the fire from the small pile of coals in the scuttle. Your fingers find the paper first, the twist of old newspaper you keep ready, then the kindling, then the coal arranged in a careful pyramid. You have done this 10,000 times. Your hands know it without your mind. The match flares, the paper catches. You watch the small flame work its way up. The fire takes and the room begins to warm by fractions, degrees so small you can barely feel them, but they add up. By the time Eleanor wakes at 6, the room will be bearable. Not warm. Bearable. You go to the basin. The water you fetched last night from the standpipe in the court outside. There is a standpipe shared between 14 families in this building and the building adjacent. You queue for it every evening with a bucket, which you carry up 2 flights of stairs and set on the windowsill to be cold and slightly cloudy by morning. You splash your face. The shock of cold water is almost useful. Your skin is dry and roughened by it, dry from the cold and the basin and the constant washing of other people's things. Alfie gets filthy in ways that seem almost artistic. Eleanor is at the age where food is primarily a decorative medium, and your hands are cracked at the knuckles. They crack every winter and you rub them with a little dripping before bed, which helps some, not entirely. You look at yourself in the small mirror propped on the windowsill. You are 24 years old. You look, you think, 32, maybe 35. Not in a vain way, not a complaint exactly, more an observation. The way London observes things, steadily, without particular sympathy, noting what is true. Your hair is light brown and needs washing, pinned up already because there is no time for it to be anything else. Your face is thin, your eyes are grey and tired, and right now they are looking at you with an expression you can only describe as knowing. You know. You've known for 11 days. You put the mirror face down on the windowsill and start breakfast. Breakfast is porridge. It is almost always porridge. Oats from the sack under the table, water from the bucket, a pinch of salt. You make it on the small iron range, watching it thicken, stirring with the wooden spoon that has been in this kitchen since before you arrived. Thomas got this room already furnished when he started at the tallow works. The spoon came with it. You do not know its history. You are grateful for it. Alfie wakes at 5:30, which is earlier than ideal and means he is grumpy before the sun is up, which is not an improvement on the general situation. He comes out from behind the curtain trailing his blanket, his hair crushed flat on one side and standing up on the other, his face doing the complicated calculations of whether to be happy about waking up. He decides on cautiously happy when he sees you. Mama. Morning, love. Porridge is nearly ready. He climbs onto the chair at the table. He can do this himself now, which still surprises you every time, the small accumulations of competence, and sits with his blanket in his lap and watches you stir. You look at him. He has Thomas's colouring, darker than yours, and his eyes are brown and serious. He is a serious child, Alfie. Watches things, thinks. Sometimes you catch him studying the fire the way an engineer might study a problem. You love him completely and without qualification. You also cannot afford another one of him. This is not a contradiction. You understand this. The world does not seem to, or at least the world that writes laws and the world that writes sermons and the world that writes articles in the newspaper about the moral duties of working-class women, does not seem to think these two things can coexist. But they do. Love is not arithmetic. Love does not expand the room. Love does not add shillings to the wages packet. Love does not stop a woman's body from doing what it is going to do, month after month, year after year, unless someone does something about it. Someone is going to have to do something about it. That is what this day is. You serve Alfie his porridge. You wake Eleanor, who protests in the way that 18-month-old protest, which is loudly and with complete commitment, and you change her and settle her in the chair with her own bowl, which she approaches with the industriousness of someone who has discovered that food is actually rather interesting. You wake Thomas at 6:15. which is when he needs to be up to get to the tallow works by 7. He sits up, runs his hand through his hair, looks at you. You look pale, he says. I'm always pale. More than usual. You look at him across the small room. He's 31 years old and has been at the tallow works for 8 years, and the smell has become part of him in the way that your father's wood smoke smell was part of him when you were a child. There is tallow in Thomas's skin now, in his hair. You don't mention it because there is nothing to be done about it, and mentioning it would only make both of you feel bad. He is not a cruel man. He's not even a careless one. He works the hours they give him, comes home, eats what you make, sleeps. He drinks on Fridays because Friday is payday, and because everyone at the tallow works drinks on Friday, and because the pub on Grange Road is warm and loud, and the opposite of 10 hours of rendering fat. He does not hit you. He does not gamble beyond a penny on the horses now and then. He is, by the standards available, a decent husband. He does not know what you are planning today. You have not decided how to tell him you are pregnant. You have not decided whether today's errand is about this pregnancy. It is too late for some things. You know this. You're probably 6 weeks gone. Or about all the pregnancies that come after. Both, probably. You're thinking about both. I thought I might go out this afternoon, you say. Take Eleanor to Mrs. Briggs, just for a couple of hours. Thomas nods. He's not suspicious. There is nothing suspicious about it. Women go out. You go to market, to the standpipe, to collect things, to return things, to visit. The details of your movements are not something he tracks. Fine, he says, and pours himself tea from the pot. You watch him eat. Porridge, same as the children, a heel of bread. He eats quickly, with the focused efficiency of a man who has learned that food is fuel and mealtimes are not recreational. He stands, shrugs on his coat. The coat is navy blue and has been mended at both elbows. He kisses you briefly on the top of your head, which is the morning gesture, the daily punctuation of domesticity. And then he is gone, his boots heavy on the stairs, and you hear the front door of the building close behind him. You stand in the centre of the room, 2 children eating porridge, fire crackling, the smell of coal smoke and damp wool and mourning. 11 days. You go to the drawer where you keep the household papers, the rent receipt, the pawn ticket for the winter coat you had to pawn in October, a letter from your mother in Lincolnshire. Underneath these, in an envelope that has no writing on the outside, is a folded piece of paper. You unfold it. It is not much to look at. A single printed page, small type, the edges worn soft with folding and unfolding. Some of the words are underlined in pencil, someone else's pencil before it came to you. You got it from Mrs. Briggs 3 months ago. Mrs. Briggs, who lives on the floor above and has 4 children and no more coming, and declined to explain how. You asked. She handed you this instead. The title at the top says, Hygienic Methods of Preventing Conception. The author is not named. There is no publisher listed. At the bottom, barely legible, it says, Published for private distribution only. This pamphlet would cost you 2 shillings if you were unlucky enough to be charged with possessing it. Under the Obscene Publications Act of 1857, material that tended to deprave and corrupt those whose minds were open to immoral influences could be seized and destroyed. A pamphlet explaining how a woman might avoid becoming pregnant in the opinion of the law qualified. You know this. You read it anyway. You have read it perhaps 20 times. You know it nearly by heart. But there is a particular line you keep coming back to. A line about a chemist. A specific chemist. though the pamphlet is careful never to name anyone outright, referring instead to surgical supply establishments and establishments dealing in hygienic goods. There is one on a street whose name the pamphlet refers to obliquely as near the Strand. That is where you're going today. You fold the pamphlet back into its envelope. You put it under the papers. You finish feeding the children and wash Eleanor's face and change Alfie into his good clothes. Not because anywhere you're going requires good clothes, but because Alfie in good clothes is less likely to roll in whatever is available for rolling in. And then you put on your own coat and hat and you go downstairs to knock on Mrs. Briggs's door. Mrs. Briggs is a broad, capable woman of about 40 with red hands and a direct manner. She opens the door and looks at you, and then at Eleanor on your hip, and something passes across her face, a slight narrowing of the eyes, an assessment. "The usual," she says, "if you don't mind." "Sixpence for the afternoon." "Of course." You have the sixpence ready. You hand Eleanor to Mrs. Briggs, who receives the child with the practised ease of a woman who has handled more children than she can easily count. Eleanor gives you a look that is partly curious and partly accusatory, which is her default expression, and then turns to study Mrs. Briggs's face with scientific interest. "Alfie's upstairs," you say. "I gave him some bread. He's all right for an hour, then he'll start asking for things." Mrs. Briggs nods. She has managed this before. She manages everything with the same calm efficiency she probably applies to blacking the stove and wringing out laundry and whatever else constitutes a Tuesday morning in her world. "How far?" she says. You look at her. 6 weeks, you say. "Maybe 7. She nods again, not judgmentally, just taking in information. "You know there's not much," she starts. "I'm not going for that," you say. "I'm going for the other." "Ah." A pause, a slight shift in her expression, something between approval and calculation. "The place I told you about?" "Near the Strand?" "Yes." Another pause. "They'll try to sell you the thing in packets. The packets are not what you want. What you want is S for Rendell's, by name. They'll know what you mean." Rendell's. You have the name already from the pamphlet, but hearing it said aloud is different. A real word in a real conversation in a real doorway in Bermondsey at 8:30 in the morning. Real in a way the pamphlet never quite managed to make it. "And don't let them charge you more than 2 and 6, Mrs. Briggs says. "I paid 1 and 9, but that was 3 years ago, and things go up." "Right," you say. There is nothing else to say. You thank her. She closes the door. You stand on the landing for a moment, listening to Eleanor's voice through the door, already asking Mrs. Briggs something in the determined vowel-heavy language of 18 months, and then you go downstairs and out into London. London in January at 8:30 in the morning. You have to understand what the streets are. Not modern crowded, not the crowd you'd know now, pressing through a station or a shopping centre or a city street on a lunch break. This is something else. This is a city of 5 million people, the largest city that has ever existed on this earth. And it is running with purpose, running with desperation, running because it has to and because it knows no other speed. The street outside your building, Western Street, narrow, cobbled, the pavements raised slightly on either side, and both of them occupied at once by people walking in both directions, and sometimes all four, is already full. The market carts came through before dawn, and now the carts are gone, but they left behind their impressions. Manure on the cobbles, vegetable matter ground into the stones, the permanent smell of everything that passes through a London street in 1887, which is considerable. Horses first, always horses. You have lived here for 4 years and you have still not entirely habituated to the volume of horses. They pull everything. Carts and carriages and omnibuses and the enormous dray wagons that come from the brewery on Grange Road twice a day. The drivers high on their seats with an air of absolute authority. Pedestrians parting before them because the alternative is worse. The sound of iron-shod hooves on cobblestones is the constant bass note of London, the thing that persists beneath everything else. Then, people. Dense, purposeful, going somewhere. The workers heading for the factories and docks and warehouses, most of them men, most of them moving quickly. The slightly hunched forward walk of people who have somewhere to be and no time to waste getting there. Women at the market stalls that are setting up along the far side of the street. The vegetable women and the rag and bone women and the woman who sells whelks from a cart, and always has a thin line of customers at this hour. Though you've never understood what appetite drives a man to whelks at 8 in the morning. Children. Too many children, on their way to school or not on their way to school, the gap between those two states not always obvious. A boy of about 7 running barefoot, which in January tells you something about the state of his household. Another boy carrying a bundle nearly as big as he is, running an errand for someone, the bundle presumably urgent given the speed of his running. 2 girls walking arm in arm, heads together, laughing at something. The smell. In January it is better than summer. Much better. The heat brings out the worst of London's smell. The human waste and the animal waste and the rotting vegetable matter and the industrial output of the tanneries and the tallow works and the factories along the river, and the cold dampens it down to something merely unpleasant rather than actually threatening. But it is never gone. It is the smell of this city, the way salt is the smell of the sea, inescapable, constitutive, the thing that tells you where you are before you have opened your eyes. Coal smoke hangs over everything, every house with a fire, and in January every house with a fire is every house, is putting smoke into the air, and the combined smoke of 5 million people doing the same thing creates a persistent yellow-grey haze that sits over London like a second sky. The sun, when it appears through this haze as a pale disk, tentative, reduced. Southerners who have never been here sometimes ask Londoners whether they miss the sun. Londoners who have lived here long enough stop noticing the difference between its presence and absence. You move through the crowd with the particular efficiency of a woman who does this every day. Hip forward, slight sideways twist when the crowd thickens, a step back when a horse swings too close, forward again. You have done this so many times that your body does it without consulting you. You have the 10-penny piece for the omnibus knotted into the corner of your handkerchief. You need to get to the Strand, which is north of the river, which means crossing London Bridge or taking an omnibus that goes across. The omnibus stop is on Borough High Street. You walk toward it. Here is what is happening in your body as you walk. The nausea is present but manageable in the cold air. Cold air helps. You discovered this with Alfie. The specific quality of movement and cold air together making the morning sickness bearable in a way that lying in a warm room does not. Your breasts ache with a dull, persistent ache that has been with you for 2 weeks. Your lower back, the particular ache of early pregnancy, the uterus beginning its long work of restructuring itself. You know these sensations. They are familiar. They are not welcome. You think about the women you know. Mrs. Briggs upstairs. 4 children, no more. She is 40 and pragmatic and gives nothing away. You do not know what she uses. She gave you the pamphlet but did not elaborate. Her husband is a carter. They live, not comfortably, but persistently. Mrs. Novak on the ground floor. 7 children. 7 children in 3 rooms. The oldest 14 and already working. The youngest still nursing. She's 33 years old. She looks 50. You have never once seen her not pregnant or nursing. It has been, as far as you can tell, her permanent condition for a decade. Your friend Agnes, who lives 2 streets over and works at the jam factory on Tanner Street, married 3 years, 1 baby died, 1 living, no more since. Agnes is cheerful and close-mouthed about this topic in the specific way that means she knows something she is not saying. And then there is Susan Mears. You try not to think about Susan Mears, but you think about her every time you have this conversation with yourself, every time you count the women you know, and think about what has happened to them. Susan Mears lived in this building 18 months ago, on the 3rd floor, with her husband who worked the docks. 4 children. Found herself with a 5th she did not want. She went somewhere. Not a chemist, not a pamphlet. Somewhere else. Somewhere that promises what no pamphlet will promise. She died in February of last year. Childbed fever, the death certificate said, which can mean many things in 1887, for a woman with no access to medical care and no money to pay for it even if she had access. Childbed fever can be what it says. Childbed fever can also be the polite shorthand for what happens when someone attempts certain things without the benefit of sanitation or training. Susan Mears was 26 years old. You think about her every single time. You're not going where Susan Mears went. You want to be clear about this, clear in your own mind, which is where clarity needs to live because there is nowhere else to put it. You're going to a chemist to buy a legal product that is sold legally and used legally by women who have made a legal decision about their own bodies and their own households. The government may have opinions about whether such women ought to be allowed to make such decisions or told about such products, but the government has not yet actually managed to make the products illegal. That distinction matters. You're holding on to it with both hands. Borough High Street. The omnibus stop is near the King's Head. A woman is already waiting there, middle-aged, carrying a basket, dressed better than you but not wealthy. 2 men in work clothes. A boy who looks like he's pretending to be somewhere for legitimate reasons. The omnibus comes, horse-drawn as everything is horse-drawn, lurching and swaying on its iron wheels. The horses looking resigned to their lot in the particular way that omnibus horses develop after a few years. You pay your penny and climb inside. The interior of the omnibus smells of wet wool and something else, indefinite. The accumulated smell of thousands of passengers. The seats along the sides are full. You stand holding the strap, swaying with the vehicle's motion, watching Borough High Street give way to London Bridge, and then the river. Even now, even distracted as you are, the river has its effect. You look south when you cross, and there it is, the Thames, wide and brown and completely indifferent, stretching east toward the docks, west toward the city. Ships at anchor in the Pool of London, the forest of masts you see from the bridge, the lighters and barges working between the ships and the shore. The smell of it comes up even in January, the specific dark smell of tidal river, mud and salt and deep water. Men built this city because of this river, because of the trade that comes up on this water, because of the ships and the commerce and the fact that you can stand in London and receive silk from India and cotton from Egypt and sugar from the Caribbean and spice from everywhere, all arriving on this same brown water. Somewhere on those ships there are rubber goods. You think about rubber. Rubber, the vulcanized kind, Charles Goodyear's process from 1844, changed things more than most people realize. Before rubber, condoms existed. They had existed for centuries, made from sheep intestine or bladder, tied at the base with a ribbon, reusable if you were careful and washed them properly. The quality varied enormously. They were expensive. They were uncomfortable. They were used primarily, when used at all, by men who wished to avoid disease, not by women who wished to avoid pregnancy. The pamphlet had something to say about this. The pamphlet, with its careful understatement and its unnamed author and its folded, worn edges, had noted that male appliances are available for purchase, but their use depends entirely on the willing cooperation of the male party, and cannot be considered a reliable method when the male party is unwilling or the female party has no means of ensuring same. You read that 3 times when you first saw it. Then you put it down and stared at the wall for a while. 'Cause that is it, isn't it? That is the whole shape of the problem, compressed into one sentence in a pamphlet that could get you arrested. The method that works best requires cooperation that cannot be guaranteed. The method that the woman controls requires knowledge she's not supposed to have and goods that are sold under other names in establishments that use euphemism because direct speech is illegal. The omnibus crosses the bridge. London proper now, north of the river, the streets different in texture and intention from Bermondsey. The buildings are taller and older and closer together, the streets narrower in some places and then suddenly wide, the whole geography of the city shifting with each block. Cannon Street, Queen Victoria Street. The Strand is north. You get off at the stop near St. Paul's and walk. St. Paul's Cathedral is visible from here, as it is visible from much of London, Wren's dome rising above the roof lines, pale stone in the winter light. You've been inside it once, on a Sunday when you first arrived in London and had not yet understood that the city would never stop surprising you with its scale. The interior is, there is no other word for it, enormous, not simply large, enormous in the way that makes you feel like a different species, something small that crawled in from the outside and stands in the nave realizing that this space was not made for you, was not made for anyone, was made with the idea of God and the demonstration of wealth, and the specific ambition of Sir Christopher Wren, and they simply built it big enough for God because nothing smaller seemed adequate. You don't have time for St. Paul's today. You walk north and west through Cheapside, through the smaller streets that feed into the Strand, the traffic thickening as you move toward the centre. This part of London has a different energy from Bermondsey, a different quality of commerce. The shops are larger, the fronts more ornate, the people are better dressed, not wealthy exactly, most of them, but the specific well-dressedness of people who work in offices and shops and have wages that allow for hats without patches and coats that fit. Here is what you know about yourself in this context. You're wearing your second best dress and your coat which is passable and your hat which is clean. You have done this deliberately. You're not well dressed, but you're not ragged. The chemist who is going to sell you what you need will want to believe you're a respectable woman, because if you are a respectable woman, his sale is legal and legitimate, and not the kind of thing that ends in court. This is Victorian respectability, not a moral system, a protective coloration. The street you're looking for is just off the Strand, a narrow cut-through between 2 larger streets. The pamphlet described it without naming it, and Mrs. Briggs described it with less care for geography than for its identifying features. A brass plate on the door, the words surgical and hygienic appliances in the window, and a smell of rubber that carries into the street. You find it by the smell before you find it by sight. The shop is small, the front is discreet. Deliberately so, you understand this immediately. The window display is limited to bottles and packages with labels that say things like female regulating compound and hygienic rinse and ladies' health tonic. Nothing that would offend, nothing that would explain to someone who didn't already know what any of it was for. The brass plate says C.W. Driscoll, Surgical and Hygienic Goods. You stand on the pavement outside for a moment. A woman comes out as you stand there, middle-aged, respectable-looking, wearing a good coat. She carries a small package wrapped in brown paper. She does not look at you. You do not look at her. This is also an arrangement, an understanding that exists without needing to be stated. Women who come to this shop have, in common, a preference not to be remarked upon. You push open the door. The smell hits you immediately. Rubber. The particular sharp smell of vulcanized rubber. And underneath it, something sharper, chemical, antiseptic. The smell of a pharmacy, or something close to one. Also, beneath that, something flowery and artificial. Rosewater or similar. Sprayed to soften the sharper smells. A gesture toward propriety. The shop is small. Shelves on 3 walls, floor to ceiling, lined with packages and bottles and things in paper wrapping. A counter across the back. A gas lamp burning, which combined with the small window in the front creates a dim private light. The light of a space that is comfortable with its own obscurity. Behind the counter, a man. He is perhaps 50, trim and correct, with the manner of a chemist. Precise, a little removed, professionally neutral. He looks at you the way a man in his position has learned to look at the women who come through his door, assessing your class, your likelihood of causing trouble, your probable purchase, all in the first 3 seconds, his face giving away nothing. "Good morning," he says. "Good morning," you say. A pause. The pause is also part of the arrangement. He is giving you the opportunity to state your purpose in whatever way is most comfortable, and he has the experience to recognize that the most comfortable way varies considerably. I was looking for Rendell's, you say. Mrs. Briggs's instruction. By name. Something in his manner shifts slightly. Barely. A fraction of relaxation. The adjustment of a man who has placed you in the correct category and can proceed. "Yes," he says. "We carry those." He goes to the shelf behind him and retrieves a small package, sets it on the counter between you. The package is plain brown paper. No identifying marks. About the size of a pack of cards. 1 shilling and 9, he says. You unfold your handkerchief and extract the coins. 2 shillings, because you expected something between Mrs. Briggs's remembered price and the price she'd warned you might have risen to. He gives you 3p change. He wraps the package again, a second layer of paper, and passes it across. You want to ask something. You have been composing the question for 11 days, and now you are standing here with the package in your hand, and the words are more difficult than you practiced. I have a question, you say. He waits. His face is politely attentive. If a woman has already, that is, if it is not prevention I need but something more, he is already shaking his head, slightly but unmistakably. I wouldn't be able to assist with that, he says. His tone has not changed, still professional, still neutral, but the meaning is clear. That is not what this shop is. That is not what he does. And in the very neutrality of his refusal there is a message, which is that you are the third or fourth woman this week who has asked, and he is sorry, but there are limits. I understand, you say. The Rendells, he says, nodding at the package, are quite reliable when used correctly. The instructions are included. A pause. They're best used in conjunction with a suitable solution. I carry Squill's antiseptic compound, which is designed for the purpose which he does not name, which he will not name here, in this shop, on this respectable street, in this city. He names the product instead, and you understand what the product is for, and the conversation proceeds entirely through implication, which is how these conversations work in 1887. How much is that, you say? 10p. You have another shilling. You take it out. He takes it and gives you 2p change and retrieves another small bottle from the shelf. Plain glass, a stopper, a yellowish liquid inside that smells, even through the stopper, sharply antiseptic. The instructions for both are in the package, he says again. You put the bottle in your pocket and the package in your bag. Thank you, you say. Good morning, he says, and that's all. You step back out onto the street. The cold air hits your face and the smell of coal smoke replaces the smell of rubber, and you stand for a moment on the pavement outside C.W. Driscoll's Surgical and Hygienic Goods, feeling something you cannot immediately name. Not relief. Not yet. Something more complicated than relief. The particular feeling of having done something that cost you something. The money, yes, 2 shillings and 7p total, which is not nothing, which is nearly half a day of Thomas's wages, but also the something else that it costs to walk into that shop and ask for what you need in a country that has decided you should not know you need it. You have just purchased, legally, a product that is sold legally, in a shop that exists legally, from a man who operates legally, and you feel like you have done something illegal. That is not your irrationality. That is the architecture of the thing, built over decades by people with opinions about what women should know and want and seek. The architecture is working exactly as designed. It makes you feel wrong even when you're not. You walk. You do not go directly back to the omnibus. You have 2 hours before you need to return to Mrs. Briggs's for Eleanor, and the thought of returning to the room in Bermondsey immediately, of standing in the small kitchen with the cracked basin, and the smell of coal smoke, and the 11 days of accumulated worry. You cannot do that yet. You need to walk first. Walk and think, and let the city do what the city does, which is absorb you into its motion until you have processed enough to function. The Strand. The Strand in 1887 is one of the great streets of the world, which is a fact that does not make you feel less tired, but which is at least worth noting. The shops here are the shops you see in the illustrated papers, the kind of establishments that cater to people whose income is not counted in shillings. Drapers with wide windows displaying fabrics you could not afford to touch. Stationers with neat gilt lettering on their signs. A hosier. A glover. A jeweller with a discreet display in the window, a few items on velvet, the price tags facing inward, because if you need to ask the price, you are not the customer. You are not the customer. But you can walk on this street. You can look. There is no law yet against walking and looking. And in a city of 5 million people, everyone walks and looks, because walking is how you get anywhere. And looking is how you stay safe. You look. A woman in an extraordinary hat, a construction of feathers and ribbon that implies both money and ambition, comes out of a shop on your left, followed by a maid carrying packages. They proceed down the street with the specific forward momentum of women who are not walking for pleasure, but executing a shopping program, and you watch them go because the hat is genuinely remarkable. a piece of architecture in its own right, and because watching rich people is one of the free entertainments of the city, there is a bookshop. You stop. The window has a display of books, spines facing out, the titles legible from the pavement. Most of them are novels, a name you recognise, a couple you don't. But in the corner of the window, a small stack plainly bound, with a card in front of it that says Bradlaugh and Besant, The Fruits of Philosophy, Historical Documents in the Matter of Regina versus Bradlaugh. You know what this is. The pamphlet told you, or told you enough. Charles Bradlaugh and Annie Besant 10 years ago in 1877. They republished a pamphlet, an American pamphlet from the 1830s, about preventing conception, deliberately, as a challenge to the Obscene Publications Act. They were arrested. They were tried. They were convicted. Bradlaugh's conviction was overturned on a technicality. Besant's conviction was overturned on appeal. But in the meanwhile, the trial was reported in the newspapers, and the newspapers, in the process of reporting the obscenity trial, printed extensive excerpts from the obscene material in order to explain exactly what was being charged, and those excerpts were read by approximately 125,000 people who bought the resulting newspapers, which was roughly 125,000 more people than had read the original pamphlet. There is an irony here. Several ironies. They're not lost on you. Annie Besant also founded the Malthusian League after the trial, an organisation dedicated to spreading birth control information to those who needed it, which was primarily the working classes, which was primarily the women of the working classes, which was primarily women like you, standing on the Strand in January 1887 with a package of Rendell's pessaries in your bag and a bottle of antiseptic in your pocket. The Malthusian League has rooms in the city. You know this from the pamphlet. The address is on a street you do not know well. You think about it for a moment. You have 2 hours. You go in the direction of the address. It takes you 20 minutes to find it, which involves 2 wrong turns and a consultation with a crossing sweeper who knows the streets better than any map. The building is unremarkable. A Georgian terrace, 3 stories, a brass plate on the door reading Malthusian League. No other identification. The kind of establishment that wants to be findable by those who are looking and invisible to those who are not. You stand outside it for a moment longer than you stood outside the chemist's. The chemist was commerce. The chemist was a transaction. This is different. This is going into a room that has opinions about things, opinions that have been prosecuted, opinions that cost Annie Besant custody of her daughter, because the judge in her divorce case decided that a woman who published information about contraception was an unfit mother. That actually happened. The pamphlet mentioned it in passing, almost as a footnote, and the footnote sat in your chest for 3 months, heavy and specific. A woman lost her child because she tried to help other women not lose themselves. You go in. The woman at the desk is 30 or so, dark-haired, wearing spectacles and a severe expression that suggests she has heard most of what anyone might say, and found little of it surprising. She looks up when you come in. "Can I help you?" I was looking for information, you say. About the League's work. The woman looks at you for a moment. The assessment again. Everyone is assessing you today. You're beginning to feel like an examination. Are you a member? No. Would you like to be? I'm not sure yet. I wanted to understand what... 6pence annual subscription, the woman says, not unkindly. Or you can make a donation. We have pamphlets available. She gestures at a table near the window where a neat stack of printed material is arranged. Free to take. You go to the table. The pamphlets are organised. Several are about population theory, Malthus, the relationship between population and poverty, the argument that large families drive families into poverty, which drives populations into misery, which creates the social conditions that lead to crime and disease and revolution. This is the League's public argument, the respectable face, not morality, not women's rights exactly, not the body or pleasure or desire. Those are not arguments that work in 1887. The argument that works, the argument that can be made in public, is economics. Too many children make people poor. Poverty is bad for everyone. Prevention is therefore rational and good. You have, in your short adult life, some experience with this argument. It is correct, as far as it goes. It is also a way of discussing the thing without discussing the thing. The real argument, the one that lives in the body of every woman you know who's been pregnant more than twice, is not about economics. It is about exhaustion and fear and the specific terror of childbirth and the specific despair of loving a child you cannot adequately feed. But the economic argument is the one that gets you through the front door of the Malthusian League without being arrested. Underneath the population pamphlets, a different one, plainer. The title, Practical Methods of Preventing Conception. Information for Married Women. You pick it up. You read. You're standing in a room off the Strand in London in January 1887, and you're reading a pamphlet about contraception. And it is more information than you have ever had access to at once. Their pamphlet from Mrs. Briggs was cautious, coded, limited. This is different. This names things by their names. This says, the cervical sponge, dampened with a solution of quinine sulfate or carbolic acid or alum, inserted before relations. This says, the male sheath, now made of vulcanized rubber, available from surgical establishments. This says, certain positions and timing methods, though these are unreliable. This says the safe period, though the safe period it describes is, as you will later learn, catastrophically wrong. Victorian science understood the menstrual cycle imperfectly, placing the safe period in entirely the wrong part of the month. But most importantly, this pamphlet says, it is not immoral to prevent conception. It says, a woman who limits her family does not sin. It says, a marriage is better served by children who are wanted and can be provided for than by unlimited children who cannot. You stand there for a long time. The woman at the desk is writing something. She does not interrupt you. There is, you notice, a quality to the room, a particular quiet that is different from the quiet of the chemist's shop. The chemist's shop was quiet with discretion, with a careful avoidance of language. This quiet is different. This is the quiet of people who have decided to say the thing plainly and are now simply waiting for other people to catch up. I'll take this one, you say. Take all of them you like, the woman says. That's why they're there. You take 3, 2 practical pamphlets and one about population and poverty, in case you need to explain why you have pamphlets, in case Thomas finds them, in case you need an argument. Are there meetings, you ask? Tuesday evenings, 7 o'clock. Mrs. Crawford leads the discussion. A pause. Women only on Tuesdays. You nod. You tuck the pamphlets into your bag beside the Rendells and the bottle of antiseptic compound. You leave. Outside, the Strand continues its oblivious motion. The omnibuses, the carriages, the pedestrians, the street vendors. The whole vast daily machinery of the city, indifferent to the fact that you have just spent a morning acquiring information that the law considers dangerous and products whose purpose you're expected to pretend does not exist. You have an hour. You walk to the river, not to cross it, just to stand at the embankment for a few minutes looking at the water. The Thames is grey today, the colour of the sky, and it moves with the same unimpressed solidity it always moves with, as if 500 years of being the artery of empire has left it without patience for drama. A river is a useful thing to look at when you are thinking. Here is what you are thinking. You are pregnant. This is true, and will remain true regardless of everything you have purchased and read this morning. The Arundels and the pamphlets are for the future, not the present. For this present, you will have to tell Thomas. You will have to find the extra money for a midwife when the time comes, because you cannot afford a doctor, but you cannot afford not to have someone there, not after Susan Mears. You will have to rearrange the already insufficient room to accommodate a third child. You will have to manage on 14 shillings a week for 5 people. This is not impossible. People manage it. Mrs. Novak manages it on a carter's wages. Your mother managed it on a farm labourer's wages in Lincolnshire. 6 children in 12 years, and she is still alive, still vigorous, still managing. But Mrs. Novak looks 50 at 33, and your mother, you haven't seen her in 4 years, the train fare being what it is, sounded, in her last letter, like someone who'd been managed by life rather than the other way around. A specific quality to the penmanship, careful but effortful, the handwriting of someone for whom energy is a limited resource to be allocated carefully. You do not want to become someone for whom energy is a limited resource. You stand at the embankment and look at the river and allow yourself for the duration of the looking to want things, which is not something you make a habit of, because wanting things in your situation is expensive and the currency is not money. You want to sleep without dreaming of money. You want to feed your children without calculating by fractions whether there is enough. You want one room that is a room and not a room that is also a kitchen and also a bedroom, and also a place where the washing dries and the children play, and the coal is stored, and everything that constitutes a life is compressed together. You want to have the children you have and love them, and not have more until you decide. This last one, this is the one. The Arundels in your bag, the pamphlets, the bottle of antiseptic, the information specific and plain from the woman at the League's desk, the memory of the chemist and his professional neutrality, and the way he handed you the package without embarrassment, which was itself a kind of dignity, a small dignity in a morning made of them. You decided something this morning, not consciously, not in a single moment, but across the hours of walking and purchasing and reading. You decided that you are going to be a woman who knows what is available to know, who uses what is available to use, who does not apologize for it. This seems, standing here by the Thames, like a very small thing. It is not, in 1887, a small thing. The cold comes up off the water, January Thames cold, the kind that finds its way through your coat in layers. You stand it for another minute, 2 minutes, letting the city's grey and brown and grey again do what it does. Then you turn around and go back. The omnibus south, London Bridge, the familiar geography of Borough High Street giving way to Bermondsey, the smell changing, more industrial, more animal, more tallow, and you are home, Mrs. Briggs's door at 3 in the afternoon. Eleanor handed back to you warm and fed. Mrs. Briggs had given her bread and milk and she smelled of it, and Alfie retrieved from upstairs where he had apparently spent the afternoon, explaining something very complicated to the neighbour's cat through the window. Back to the room. the fire still going, the small warmth of it. You put Eleanor down for her afternoon sleep. You sit Alfie with a handful of dried peas to arrange, which will occupy him for approximately 20 minutes. You go to the drawer. You take out the pamphlet from Mrs. Briggs. You take out the new pamphlets. You take out the package from the chemist and the bottle. You read the instructions. They are practical, specific. They describe the use of the pessaries with the confidence of instructions for a domestic task, which is what this is, a domestic task, as domestic as bread making or laundry, the maintenance of the household in this particular and previously unspoken way. There is a diagram. There are measurements. There are notes about timing and about the solution and about the importance of consistent application. You read it twice. Then you put everything back in the drawer, under the household papers, and you sit with your hands in your lap for a moment. Alfie has finished with the dried peas. He has built them into a sort of wall along the edge of the table, and is now knocking them off one by one with methodical satisfaction. "What are you doing?" you ask. "Making them fall," he says. "I can see that." "It's good," he says. "They fall good." He's right. They do fall with a satisfying small clatter, each one. You watch him knock them off the edge one by one. Tomorrow Thomas will come home and you will tell him, "Not tonight." You cannot have that conversation with Alfie at the table and Eleanor asleep in the wardrobe drawer. Tomorrow, when they're both settled and the fire is down to embers, and there is a quiet in the room that is as close to privacy as 2 rooms in Bermondsey ever get. You don't know exactly how he will take it. You know he will not be cruel about it. You know, you believe, that he will agree about the Rendals, about the future, about the principle of not doing this again on this schedule. Thomas is not a man with opinions about female biology. He is a man with a budget and he knows the numbers as well as you do. But the pregnancy, the third one, he may be, you don't know. You will find out tomorrow. Tonight, supper, putting the children to bed, Thomas coming home smelling of tallow and the particular exhaustion of 10 hours in a hot factory, the Friday ale that is still 3 days away but whose absence tonight means he will be quieter and easier and readier for sleep. Tonight you will make supper and clean up and lie in the bed in the dark and listen to your city, which does not sleep and does not care and goes on and on regardless. You will lie there and think about everything you did today. The omnibus, the chemist, the Malthusian League, the woman at the desk who said take all of them you like with a matter-of-factness that was itself, you realise now, a kind of politics, not dramatic politics, not platform politics, not speeches in the street, the politics of practical information, the politics of a woman at a desk saying clearly and without apology, here is what exists and here is how you use it and here is why it matters. Alfie knocks off the last pea. He looks at the empty table and then at you. They're all gone, he says. They are, you say. I could do more. Not the peas again. What about the buttons? He considers this. The buttons, a collection of odd buttons in a tin on the shelf, have been his preferred sorting material for weeks. He can spend an hour with the buttons. Buttons, he decides, and holds up his arms to be carried to the shelf where the tin lives. You pick him up. He is heavy in the way that 3-year-olds are heavy, a solid, warm weight against your shoulder, and he smells of porridge and wool and the dusty, warm smell of young child that you have memorised in the same way you memorised his breathing. You get him down the tin. He sits at the table with the buttons and begins his sorting. You start supper. You're 24 years old and you're pregnant for the 3rd time, and you went to a chemist today and a league office, and you came home with things you needed and information you could use, and you made decisions for yourself, in a city that had no particular interest in you making them. That is enough for one day. The fire pops. Eleanor stirs in the wardrobe drawer. The distant sound of Bermondsey going about its evening business comes through the walls. Voices, cartwheels, a dog, someone's door. You start the onions. They sizzle in the pan, and the smell of them rising is the most ordinary smell in the world. Onions cooking. The smell of someone making dinner in a small kitchen at the end of an ordinary, extraordinary Tuesday. You cook and you think, and the evening comes. This is what you need to understand about Victorian women and contraception. Almost all of it was women's knowledge. Almost all of it moved sideways between women through exactly the kind of channels you navigated today. The chemist was in on it. The Malthusian League was in on it. The woman who gave Mrs. Briggs the pamphlet was in on it. The woman who gave it to her. Back and back and back. Men were not ignorant, but the knowledge was maintained primarily by women because the consequences landed primarily on women. The arithmetic of that was simple and brutal and as old as the species, and Victorian England, for all its empire and its cathedral and its omnibuses, had not improved on it. What it had provided was rubber and print, and very occasionally women like Annie Besant, who stood in court and made the argument plainly and paid the price and made it anyway. The pamphlets in your drawer will not change the law. The Rendels in the package will not change the law. You will not change the law, but you will change your life. You are changing your life. Slowly, practically, in the specific way that women change things, by doing what needs doing with what is available in the spaces between everything else, while also making supper and putting children to bed and living the rest of it. The onions brown. You add the potatoes. The children's breathing from the other room. The fire. The windows going dark outside as January evening comes down over London, the way it does, all at once and without apology. Thomas will come home at 6. You will feed him and sit with him in the small quiet after supper, and you will decide then whether tonight or tomorrow is for the conversation. You will manage it. You have managed everything else. The potatoes bubble, the fire settles, the city beyond your window makes its city sounds, the eternal sounds of 5 million people finding their way through another evening. Alfie at the table with his buttons, sorting by size now, the largest in one group, the smallest in another, his face serious and concentrated, completely absorbed in the private logic of his game. You watch him, you love him. You cannot afford another one right now. These 3 things are true at once, all 3 of them, and the holding of them together is what you do. What women do. What women have always done in this city, in every city, in every cramped room above an ordinary street in the history of people living in cities. They hold the things that cannot all be true at once, and they hold them, and they cook supper, and they manage. That is what this story is about. Not about history as it is usually told, kings and battles and the passage of laws, about history as it is lived, in small rooms, in the smell of onions and coal smoke, in a package wrapped in brown paper that a man in a decent shop passes across a counter without making eye contact, in a woman who walked across London in January to find out what was available to know, and found out, and came home, and made supper. Her name was Mary Ellen Hadley, or someone like her. 100,000 women like her in London alone in 1887. Most of them you will never know the names of because they did not do things that make it into the historical record. They did not stand in court. They did not write pamphlets. They did not make speeches. They stood in chemists' shops and asked by name and took the change and left. They saved their own lives. They managed their own households. They did it in the teeth of a law that thought they shouldn't know, and a society that thought they shouldn't want, and a church that thought they were sinning, and a husband whose cooperation they could not always guarantee, and a body that did not care what any of these institutions thought. They did it anyway. The Malthusian League held its meetings. Annie Besant went to court and was convicted of obscenity and won on appeal and kept going. The rubber goods manufacturers made pessaries that worked. The chemists stocked them. The women found out. Slowly, through channels, sideways and underground and from woman to woman, the way that the knowledge of anything important moves when the official channels have decided it shouldn't be moving at all. By 1900, the birth rate in England was falling, not because men had changed, not because the law had changed. It hadn't, not significantly, because women had found out what were available, because the Rendell's pessaries were being sold in enough chemist shops in enough cities and towns that women who needed them could find them, because the pamphlets were circulating, because the Tuesday evening meetings at the League were attended, because women talked to each other in the particular direct way that women talk to each other about things that matter. By 1900, the average working-class family in England had 4 children instead of 7. That is 3 people per family who did not exist. 3 people per family who were not born into poverty, not born into rooms too small to hold them, not born into the 14 shillings a week. That shift, that demographic shift, that reduction in the birth rate that is visible in the census records and the public health statistics and the graphs economists draw about Victorian industrialisation, it was made by women like the one standing at your stove right now. Women with brown paper packages and pamphlets and the information they found by walking across London on a January Tuesday. Thomas comes home at 6:15. He smells of tallow and exhaustion. He hangs up his coat. He sits at the table and looks at the food and says, "That smells good," which it does. The potatoes with the onions and the bit of dripping you found in the bottom of the pot. The bread you cut this afternoon. He eats with the same efficient focus as always. Alfie tells him something very detailed about the buttons. Eleanor throws a piece of bread on the floor with the definite air of scientific inquiry. Thomas catches your eye over the children's heads. He looks at you the way he looked at you this morning, slightly concerned, assessing. "You're still pale," he says. "I'll tell you later," you say. He hears something in your voice. He doesn't press. Later, when the children are asleep and the fire is low and the room has settled into the particular quality of evening silence that belongs to this room and no other room, you tell him. You tell him about the 3rd heartbeat you have known for 11 days. You tell him about the Rendells and the pamphlets. Not all of it. The broad strokes. The decision you have made about after. You tell him about the arithmetic. Not because he doesn't know it, but because saying it aloud makes it real, makes it a thing you're both looking at instead of both avoiding. He sits across from you at the table, the candle between you, his hands around his cup. He's quiet for a long time. "Another one," he says. "Yes." "All right." Another pause. "All right, we'll manage." "I know. The other thing," he nods slightly. Not at anything, just nodding. "That makes sense." A pause. "I should have." He stops, starts again. "I should have." "Is not about should have," you say. "It's about what's next." He looks at you. He's a decent man in the ways available to him. "Right," he says. "What's next?" What is next is sleep. You blow out the candle. You get into the narrow bed. Thomas curls toward the wall. You pull the blanket up. The sounds of the city come in through the window, reduced by winter and distance, but never fully absent. Someone walking, a cat probably. The distant sound of a church clock somewhere in the borough striking the half hour. You lie in the dark and breathe. The package in the drawer, the pamphlets, the things you know now that you did not know this morning, or knew incompletely, or knew but had never had confirmed in the specific plain language of the Malthusian League's Tuesday meeting pamphlets. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Wednesday is market day on Bermondsey Street. You will take Alfie and Eleanor and buy the things you need to buy with the money that is what it is. Thursday Thomas gets paid. Friday he will go to the pub on Grange Road, because he's earned it, because 10 hours in a tallow works earns it. Saturday, the room needs cleaning. Sunday, theoretically church, practically the complex negotiation of keeping 2 small children in anything resembling appropriate behaviour for an hour, which burns more energy than the rest of the week combined. And next Tuesday at 7 o'clock, a meeting at the Malthusian League's rooms off the Strand. Women only. Mrs. Crawford will lead the discussion. You are going. This is what you decide in the dark, with Thomas's breathing going slow and deep beside you, and the children asleep behind the curtain. You're going to the meeting. You're going to find out what else is available to know, and then you are going to know it. The church clock strikes again, further away. Counting an hour you are too tired to track. The city settles. Your city. 5 million people and all their lives breathing and working and moving through it. The endless, complicated human machinery of London in 1887. And you, Mary Ellen Hadley, 24 years old, apprentice to your own survival, lying in a narrow bed in Bermondsey, learning. You close your eyes. There is the darkness. There is the breathing of the people you love. There is the distant sound of the city which does not sleep, which never fully sleeps, which goes on and on and on through the hours like something that has forgotten how. But you can sleep. You've earned it. Let the rest of the night do what it does. Let the darkness be dark. Let the city murmur in the distance and the fire settle in its grate, and the children breathe and breathe and breathe. You are warm enough. You are fed. You are safe. You have done what you needed to do today, and tomorrow will come soon enough with everything it brings. But right now, just this. The particular weight of your own body in your own bed at the end of a day that cost you something and gave you something back, which is more than most days manage. Your eyes are heavy. The kind of heavy that comes from walking and thinking and deciding and carrying children on your hip up 2 flights of stairs. The city breathes. You breathe. The 2 of you, breathing together, the city and the woman in the narrow bed, as you have breathed together every night of your time here, as you will breathe together for as long as you stay. Sleep comes the way it always comes at the end of enough, without ceremony, without announcement. One moment you are thinking and the next moment you are not. The city continues. You don't. Not tonight. Tonight you rest. Centuries will pass. Wednesday morning. You wake at the same hour as always, that pre-dawn awakening that pregnancy has made its own particular routine. The nausea arriving like a punctual and unwelcome guest before the light. You have learned to lie still in the first minutes. Motion makes it worse. Breathing through the nose. Slow, deliberate. The kind of breathing you have to think about rather than the automatic kind that happens while you sleep. Thomas is already gone. He leaves before 5 in winter. before the sky commits to any particular colour. His boots on the stairs, a sound you hear even through sleep. The specific 4-beat rhythm of his step that you've memorised the way you've memorised all the sounds of this building. He will be at the tallow works before the shift bell. He is never late. Being late at the tallow works means a docking of wages. A docking of wages means the arithmetic gets worse, and the arithmetic does not have much room to get worse. You told him last night, he said, "All right, we'll manage." He said, "The other thing makes sense." He did not say much else. But he put his hand on your arm before he rolled towards sleep, just briefly, a warmth, and that was something. That counted. You get up. The fire, the basin, the children. Alfie comes out from behind the curtain already talking, which means he's been awake for some time constructing something in his head that he needs to share. Today it is something about the cat in the building next door. The cat apparently has a different walk depending on whether it has seen you or not. When it doesn't see me, it walks like this, Alfie demonstrates, moving across the room with a stiff-legged deliberateness that you recognise as his idea of a cat. But when it sees me, it goes like this. A different walk, lower, more purposeful, the walk of an animal with intentions. "Does the cat like you?" you ask. "I don't think so," Alfie says, sitting down at the table with the philosophical calm of someone who has made his peace with not being liked by cats. "But I like it. You make the porridge." Eleanor wakes at 6:30, which is good, which means she slept through. She's more cheerful than usual this morning, sitting in her drawer watching you with bright eyes, accepting her porridge with the business-like focus that is her primary mode of being. She does not have Alfie's gift for observation. She has instead a kind of intensity of engagement, everything she encounters receiving her complete attention in sequence. The spoon, the bowl, the pattern of light on the wall from the window, you, the spoon again. You love her completely and without qualification. You eat your own porridge standing at the range, which is what you do on mornings when you don't have time to sit, which is most mornings. The nausea makes the porridge difficult. You eat it anyway, because the midwife who attended Eleanor told you plainly that eating was better than not eating, even when eating was unpleasant, the kind of advice that is correct and also deeply unhelpful in the moment. Market day. Wednesday is the Bermondsey Street Market, which runs along the eastern side from Borough High Street down toward the river. Stalls setting up from about 7, the full market running until early afternoon when the stalls begin to pack away and the street reasserts its usual character. You need bread, potatoes, some form of protein if anything's affordable today, perhaps a cabbage. You have 1 shilling and 4pence for food until Friday's wages. You put Eleanor in the shawl, tied across your body, her against your chest, your coat over both of you. A construction you have refined over 18 months to something approaching practical. And you take Alfie's hand, and you go downstairs and into the morning. The market is already going when you get there. The stalls line the street, trestle tables with their wares, the sellers in their layers of coat and hat, breath misting in the cold air, the particular atmosphere of an outdoor market in January, which is part commerce and part collective endurance. The smell of it. Vegetables and sawdust and horse from the carts. The sharp smell of raw meat from the butcher's stall at the near end. Pickle brine from a barrel near the bread cellar, and underneath it all the permanent Bermondsey smell of tallow and the river. You know this market. You know which stalls are good and which pad their weights, which bread seller uses too much chalk in the flour, which butter seller cuts it with lard and which doesn't. You've calibrated yourself to this market over 4 years of shopping in it, and you move through it with the efficiency of someone who knows exactly what they need and roughly what it will cost, and has very little patience for anything that doesn't fit that calculation. Potatoes first. 3p a pound, she's asking. You buy £3. A loaf of bread from the seller you trust, 4p halfpenny. You stand at the meat stall for a long time, looking at the cuts, doing the arithmetic, and settle on a small piece of neck end of mutton, 7p, which will make a broth that will stretch across 3 meals if you're careful with it. Cabbage, 2p. A bunch of carrots, penny. That is 1 shilling and 3.5p. You have a halfpenny left. You buy Alfie a piece of toffee from the sweet seller at the end because he has been good and patient and hasn't asked for anything, which for a 3-year-old at a market is a performance of considerable self-control that deserves recognition. He receives the toffee with the gravity of a diplomat accepting a treaty document, and immediately puts it in his pocket to save for later, which tells you everything about the kind of person Alfie is going to be. You are on your way back, Eleanor's warm weight against your chest, Alfie's hand in yours, the shopping bag pulling on your other arm, when you hear your name. Mary, Agnes. She's coming from the direction of the jam factory, which is south, which means she came in early today. She works the morning shift when there's enough work. Piecework mostly, sealing jars. Her hands are always slightly sticky. She has the kind of face that started pretty and aged into interesting, all planes and angles, with eyes that are very direct and slightly unexpected in their directness, as if she's always slightly amused by you and not trying very hard to hide it. Market already, she says, falling into step beside you, getting in early. She looks at you. The same quick assessment that Mrs. Briggs did yesterday, that the woman at the Malthusian League did. You seem to be attracting assessments this week. You look rough, she says, which from Agnes is not cruelty but honesty. Thank you, Agnes. No, I mean, not rough. Just, is it again? You look at her sideways. How did you know? Because I've seen that exact look on your face twice before, and both times. She stops. Glances at Alfie, who's walking with the focused attention of someone navigating a complex landscape. Both times you were. Yes, you say. It's again. Agnes says nothing for a moment. 6 weeks, she guesses. Something like that. Right. A pause. And you went to the chemist's? You stop walking. She stops too, turning to face you with an expression that is entirely level, entirely unashamed. I'm not asking to pry, she says. I just know where you went. I went there too, after the second one. After the second one. Agnes lost her first, a boy, at 3 months. The second is still living, a girl of 2 years named Judith, who you've seen at Agnes's rooms, a small serious person with Agnes's directness already visible in her face. There has been no third. You have always wondered how. Rendell's, you say. Yes. She starts walking again, and you fall back into step. Did he tell you about the solution? Yes. Use it together. Don't skip the solution. I tried to be economical about it once. She shakes her head. Don't be economical. I wasn't going to be economical. Good. A pause. The timing matters too. Before. Always before, not after. The pamphlet says... I've read the pamphlet. Which one? Both. The one from Mrs. Briggs and the League's. Agnes turns her head to look at you properly. You went to the League? Yesterday. Something in her face shifts. Not surprise exactly. More like a kind of respect that she doesn't make a production of. Good, she says. I've been meaning to go. There's a meeting on Tuesdays, women only. Is there? She thinks about this. Judith's old enough for Mrs. Kowalski to mind her for an evening. Maybe. You walk in silence for a half-minute, the market noise receding behind you. Alfie has released your hand to examine something on the pavement, a piece of broken tile that has interesting properties, and you let him, keeping him in your peripheral vision. Agnes, you say. When did you? How long before you knew it was working? Agnes considers this with the seriousness it deserves. 3 months before I trusted it completely, she says. The first month I was sick with worry the whole time. The second month I was less sick with worry. Third month I realised I was actually worried about something else. Not that. And that meant it was working. A pause. It's not perfect. The pamphlet says 90%, which sounds like a lot until you think about what the other 10% means. 10% is a lot. 10% is entirely too much. But it's better than nothing. It's considerably better than nothing. Alfie comes back with the tile, which he wishes to keep. You can keep it until we get home, you tell him, but it stays outside the room. He accepts this condition with the pragmatism of a child who has learned to take what terms are available. You reach the corner where your streets diverge. Tuesday, Agnes says. It is not quite a question. Tuesday, you confirm. She goes her way. You go yours. You think about her as you climb the stairs to the room. Agnes, who works the morning shift at the jam factory and lives in 2 rooms on Jamaica Road and has 1 living child and has managed to keep it at 1. Agnes, who has the direct eyes and the sticky hands and who knew where you had been before you told her, because she had been there too. The network. You've been thinking about the network since yesterday, and you will keep thinking about it, because it is the thing that interests you underneath everything else. Not the products. The products are just things, rubber and chemistry, the outcome of a century of industrial development. But the network that distributes them, that carries the information, that passes the pamphlet from hand to hand, along a chain that goes Annie Besant to a printer, to a meeting, to someone, to someone, to someone, to Mrs. Briggs, to you. Women talking to women about things the law would prefer they not discuss. There is a history in that too. Older than the Malthusian League. Older than rubber. Ancient, actually. Women have been talking to each other about contraception since before anyone wrote anything down, which means there are long periods of that history we don't know about, can only infer from odd passages in documents written by men who disapproved. The Talmud mentions contraceptive sponges used by nursing women, sponges soaked in liquid, inserted. This is a practice described in texts from the 1st and 2nd centuries. Ancient Egypt, papyrus documents from 1550 BCE listing contraceptive recipes. Honey, carbonate of sodium, crocodile dung mixed with a fermented dough. Some of these would have had some acidic effect on sperm motility. Some of them would have been essentially useless. All of them represent knowledge that someone carried and passed on, one woman to another, across centuries in which that knowledge was rarely written down, because the women who had it rarely wrote things down. And in between, the church. The Christian church, which for 1,000 years controlled Western Europe's definition of what women were allowed to know and want and do, and which had clear opinions about contraception. Opinions that were also, interestingly, inconsistent over time, some early theologians taking pragmatic positions, later ones becoming more restrictive. The whole question tangled up with ideas about the purpose of marriage, the sinfulness of pleasure, the nature of women as vessels whose proper function was reproduction. And through all of it, the women, still talking, still passing the knowledge, still meeting by wells and washing places and market stalls, the informal communication networks of people whose formal networks are denied to them. You can prosecute the pamphlet. You cannot prosecute the conversation between two women at a market. You put the shopping away and sit down. Alfie is at the table with his tile. Eleanor is asleep in her drawer, having been bounced to sleep by the motion of the market walk. The room smells of cold air and onions from last night's supper, and the specific smell of small children at the end of a morning's activity. You are thinking about the sponge, not Rendell's pessaries, which are a refinement, a pre-made, pre-formed pessary containing quinine sulfate, a substance that has both spermicidal properties and some cervical barrier function. The pessary as a concept is older, much older. The sponge, used as a cervical barrier soaked in various solutions, appears in the medical literature of ancient Rome, used in medieval Europe with varying efficacy, mentioned discreetly in 18th century texts as a method used by French women. It was always attributed to French women, the contraception, as if the English needed the reassurance that it was foreign, the implication being that English women wouldn't, only French women would, a fiction everyone maintained while the sponge sellers did their quiet trade in every city in England. The sponge was what Mrs. Besant and Mr. Bradlaugh published about in 1877. The pamphlet they republished, Dr. Charles Knowlton's Fruits of Philosophy, originally published in Boston in 1832, described the sponge method in detail, as well as syringes for postcoital douching, as well as other methods. Knowlton was fined twice in America for publishing it. Besant and Bradlaugh were prosecuted in England for republishing it 45 years later, which tells you something about the speed of progress in this area. The prosecution produced a different result from what anyone expected. The trial was reported at length in the major newspapers. The newspapers, obligated to explain what the defendants had published, quoted extensively from the offending pamphlet. The result was that by the time the trial concluded, conviction overturned on a technicality for Bradlaugh, overturned on appeal for Besant. Approximately 125,000 additional copies of Fruits of Philosophy had been sold, compared to perhaps 700 in the preceding years. The prosecution made the pamphlet famous. The prosecution turned Annie Besant into a household name in discussions of birth control. The prosecution was, as prosecutions of information have a long history of being, counterproductive. After the trial, the Malthusian League, Annie Besant and Charles Drysdale and others, formally organised, with offices and publications and meetings, and the public argument that population must be controlled, and the private argument that women must be allowed to control their own fertility, and the strategic decision to make the public argument loudly, and the private argument quietly, because the public argument might win, and the private argument would get them arrested. They are still there, off the Strand, the brass plate, the woman at the desk. Take all of them you like. You will go Tuesday. The afternoon passes in the ordinary way of afternoons. Alfie's nap, which he resists but eventually succumbs to. Eleanor waking and being managed through the particular irritability of an 18-month-old who has been woken before she was ready. The beginning of the mutton broth. The piece of neck end going into the pot with carrots and the remains of an onion, water from the bucket, salt. The smell of it building slowly through the room, the particular deepening smell of meat and root vegetables that is the smell of winter cooking, of economy making itself into something approaching pleasure. You do what needs doing, your hands know the work, The wooden spoon, the cracked basin, the specific geography of this room that you have memorized in 4 years of living in it. The loose board by the window, the way the draught comes in around the chimney when the wind is from the north, the exact position you need to be in to get the best light from the window from mending in the afternoon. You think, while your hands work, about what is available, about what Victorian women had and did not have in this year of 1887, and the differences between what was available to you in Bermondsey and what was available to a woman in a different house on a different street with a different amount of money. Let's be precise about this. The Rendell's wife's friend pessaries, which is their full name. Wife's friend. As if the manufacturer understood exactly what he was marketing and to whom, cost you 1 shilling and 9 from the chemist near the Strand. The antiseptic solution was 10p. Total, 2 shillings and 7p. Thomas earns 14 shillings a week. 2 shillings and 7p is roughly a sixth of a week's wages. That is not nothing. That is the kind of sum you have to think about. A woman in Mayfair, wife of a solicitor or a prosperous merchant, has a household budget of perhaps £5 or £6 a week. 2 shillings and 7p is for her the cost of a pair of gloves. She buys the pessaries through her husband's pharmacist, or through a pharmacist in a wealthy district where discretion is assumed and the products are neatly packaged and no one needs to ask for them by name. She has access to a physician who might, if she is very lucky and has chosen her physician carefully, discuss her options with her. She might also have access to the cap. The rubber cervical cap, known variously as the Dutch cap, the wishbone pessary, the Mensinger diaphragm. Wilhelm Mensinger, a German physician, developed the modern design in 1882, and it reached England within a few years, initially only available through physicians and then through surgical suppliers. It is more expensive than the sponge pessary. It requires fitting. It requires a level of anatomical self-knowledge that the working-class woman's moral education has actively worked to prevent. It is more reliable. It is the method that will eventually in the 20th century become one of the primary forms of female contraception. But in 1887, the cap is a method for women with money and access and a physician willing to discuss it. It is not a method for Bermondsey. And then below the methods that are bought, the methods that are free, or nearly free, or cost nothing but consequence. Coitus interruptus, withdrawal. The oldest contraceptive method known to history, arguably, it appears in Genesis, in the story of Onan, from which both the name and the church's prohibition are derived. Though the biblical prohibition is about more than contraception, and the story is considerably more complicated than the use to which it was later put. Regardless, withdrawal, practiced since people began thinking about such things, which is to say since approximately forever. Free, requiring only the cooperation and self-control of one party, unreliable in direct proportion to how much that party's self-control is compromised by the very moment at which it is most needed. The pamphlet was careful about withdrawal, noted its history, noted its widespread use, noted that it placed the entire burden of prevention on the male party, and was therefore both unreliable and, this word in the pamphlet was notable, undignified for the female. Undignified. Someone had thought carefully about that word and put it there deliberately. Not just unreliable, not just inconvenient, undignified. You remember reading that line 3 weeks ago in the drawer with Alfie asleep and Eleanor fed. Undignified. The specific quality of a method that requires a woman to place her future in another person's hands and then wait. And then, the rhythm method, which in 1887 does not work, not because the concept is wrong. There is indeed a pattern to fertility across the menstrual cycle, but because Victorian science had it exactly backwards. The prevailing medical understanding placed the fertile period immediately after menstruation and the safe period in the 2 weeks before. In fact, ovulation occurs in the middle of the cycle, roughly 14 days before menstruation, making the Victorian safe period the most fertile period and the fertile period immediately after menstruation relatively safe. This error was not corrected until the 1930s, when Kusaku Ogino in Japan and Hermann Naus in Austria independently worked out the actual timing of ovulation. The rhythm method, properly understood, became available 60 years after 1887. In the meantime, countless women using the Victorian rhythm method, which is to say a contraceptive method that is effectively worse than random chance, and wondering why it wasn't working. This is not ignorance exactly. This is the specific kind of ignorance that is produced by a medical establishment that has not thoroughly investigated women's reproductive physiology, because it has not thought it necessary to do so, combined with a moral establishment that has opposed the distribution of what information does exist. The result is women in bedrooms across England, working with incorrect information, trying to apply it, watching it not work, concluding that prevention is simply not possible, and accepting the pregnancies as they come. The women who know differently, the women who have the Rendells and the antiseptic and the pamphlet from the League, those women are not exempt from everything, not perfectly protected, but better off, meaningfully better off, in the specific, measurable way that fewer pregnancies means more survival. Because this is also what you know, in a way that no one has directly told you, but which is impossible to miss if you are paying attention in a working-class neighbourhood in London in 1887. Pregnancy kills women. Not always. Not even usually if everything goes reasonably well, but often enough that every woman of your acquaintance has known someone, has lost someone, to childbirth itself, to the aftermath of childbirth, to the things that go wrong in the weeks after that are lumped together under the term childbed fever, and include a spectrum of conditions ranging from uterine infection to what would now be called postpartum sepsis, to the specific lethal aftermath of interventions attempted in unsterile conditions. Susan Mears, 26 years old, February last year. You think about her a great deal, in the way you think about someone whose death is still partly incomprehensible, not because you don't understand the mechanism, but because understanding the mechanism doesn't help you understand why her specifically. Why then? Why in that building 2 flights above the street you walk on every day? She had 4 children when she became pregnant with the 5th. She knew what she knew, which was what most women in her position knew. Not much. She knew that more children was not possible. She knew that there were things that could be done if you knew where to go, if you had the money, if you were willing to take the risk. She was not the only woman in London in 1886 to have an illegal abortion. She was one of thousands. The number is not precisely known because most of these procedures were not recorded, were not reported, were attended by no physician, and not certified by any authority. They were performed by women, usually women, with varying degrees of skill and varying degrees of cleanliness, and varying degrees of anything resembling medical knowledge. Some of them were midwives, some of them were herbalists, some of them were neighbours who had learned by necessity. The outcome depended on many things: the stage of the pregnancy, the method used, the cleanliness of the instruments, if instruments were used, whether the woman had any existing infection, whether she had access to any care in the aftermath. Susan Mears did not have access to care in the aftermath. You will not go where she went. You have said this. You mean it. But you also understand, standing at the range, stirring the broth, and feeling the specific nausea of your body's third announcement, that the distance between your decision and the desperation that drove hers is not as large as you would like it to be, is not a matter of character or morality, is a matter of the Rendels in the drawer, which you have now and she did not have, a matter of the pamphlet, a matter of Mrs. Briggs, who gave you the pamphlet, and the unnamed woman who gave it to Mrs. Briggs, and Annie Besant, who went to court so the information could exist. The chain. You add a pinch more salt to the broth. The room fills with the smell of it. Alfie wakes from his nap with the sudden full alertness of a person who goes from sleep to operating speed in approximately 2 seconds, and immediately wants to know about the tile. Where is the tile? You confirm that the tile is outside on the windowsill where you said it would be. He's satisfied with this and goes to check. Eleanor wakes 5 minutes later with considerably less alertness and considerably more complaint. You hold her. She's heavy and warm and smells of sleep, the sweet, close smell of a sleeping child that is specific and irreplaceable. And she puts her face against your neck and breathes. She's not fully awake yet. She's in the intermediate territory between sleep and waking, where she accepts being held without question, which is unusual for Eleanor, who is normally in motion. You hold her for longer than you need to. This child, this particular 18-month wait and warmth, this is what you are managing the arithmetic for. This is what the Rendels is for. Not because you don't want more. Not because loving Alfie and Eleanor is not sufficient argument for more children. Not because you don't understand the potential of that. The person who is not yet born, the particular existence that would be theirs. Because you want the ones you have to eat. You want them to eat properly and have shoes and have a mother who is not depleted by continuous pregnancy into the exhausted shell you see in Mrs. Novak on the ground floor. You want to be able to do this well rather than do it constantly. You want the margin, the small margin, the margin that the Rendels might provide. Eleanor lifts her head and looks at you with the complete solemnity of someone examining a familiar but still interesting phenomenon. "Mamma," she says. "Hello, love," you say. "Have a good sleep?" She considers this. Then, biscuit. There aren't any biscuits. She looks mildly betrayed, but accepts reality with reasonable grace. Bread? There's bread. Bread, she agrees, and holds out her arms to be put down, already thinking about bread, her interests recalibrated. Thomas comes home at 6:20. He is quieter than usual. He eats. He plays with Alfie briefly after supper, a game that involves Alfie explaining the properties of the tile to Thomas, who listens with the dedicated attention of a man who understands that this is important to a 3-year-old, and therefore it is important. He puts Eleanor to bed, carrying her on his shoulder while she protests and then falls asleep on the way, which is her preferred method of being put to bed. Protest first, sleep second, never admit that sleep was the plan. When the children are both settled, he comes and sits across from you at the table. He has something on his face, not unhappiness exactly, something more considered. He has been thinking about last night. The thing you went for yesterday, he says. He doesn't name it. He is not the kind of man who names things directly if they can be not named. It works. Agnes uses it. She hasn't been. It's been 2 years. He nods. He knows Agnes vaguely. Agnes's husband Jim worked at the docks for a while before moving to a different yard. And you know how, again, the ellipsis, the preference for implication over statement. Yes, you say. There are instructions. I've read them. He nods again. His hands are around his cup. His fingers have tallow worked into the creases of the knuckles. He looks at his own hands for a moment. We should have. He stops, starts again. 3 years and it didn't. It wasn't your fault, you say, or mine. Neither of us knew what was available. We know now. He looks up at you. In the candlelight, his face is tired and ordinary and familiar. The man you married at 20, the man who works 10 hours a day rendering fat and comes home and plays with his children and sometimes says nothing for an entire evening, because there is nothing left in him for words, who is not unkind, who is not glamorous, who is here. Right, he says, we know now. That is all he says, but he reaches across the table and puts his hand over yours briefly, which is the gesture, the same gesture as last night, the hand on the arm, the brief warmth, and then he takes it back and finishes his tea. The candle burns down. The city makes its sounds. You go to bed. Thursday passes and Friday passes and Thomas gets paid and the arithmetic is tight, but not impossible. The way it is always tight but not impossible. The way the working poor of every city and every century have always found it tight but not quite impossible. The people who exist in the sliver of space between getting by and not getting by, and have made that sliver into a home. Friday evening, Thomas goes to the Grange Road pub. He comes back at 10, not drunk exactly, pleasantly eased. The week's accumulated weight of the tallow works distributed by 2 pints of bitter into something he can set down and leave until Monday. He smells of the pub and he is in a good mood. The specific expansive warmth of the working man's Friday. And he brings you a little piece of something, this week a paper twist of peppermints from the confectioner near the pub, which is the Friday gesture, the weekly punctuation, the marker that says, I thought about you while I was out. You put the peppermint in your mouth and the sharp sweetness of it is extraordinary, unnecessary and wonderful, and you think about how small the gesture is and how completely it lands. Saturday. Cleaning. The room does not clean itself, and if you do not clean it on Saturday, it accumulates the particular sediment of a week of life lived in 2 rooms by 4 people, which is considerable. You sweep, scrub, air the bedding on the windowsill despite the cold, boil water and wash the children's clothes and some of your own and Thomas's shirts. Hang them to dry on the line you've strung between the chimney breast and the wardrobe. Alfie helps with the sweeping, which means he moves the broom vigorously in several directions and displaces dust without significantly removing it. And Eleanor helps with the laundry by pulling things out of the basket one at a time and examining them, and you clean around and above and occasionally through this assistance. Saturday evening, when the children are in bed and Thomas is reading the newspaper, a copy of the South London Observer that someone at work left behind, 2 days old. Thomas reading it from front to back with the focused interest of a man who has limited access to information and makes the most of what arrives. You go to the drawer. You take out the pamphlets. You read the practical one again, more carefully this time, with the specific attention of someone who is not acquiring general information but preparing to do a thing. There are instructions. They are clear. There is a diagram. You look at the diagram for a long time. Then you read the population pamphlet. The one with the Malthusian argument. The numbers about family size and poverty. The argument laid out in the measured language of people who've decided that economics is a safer register than ethics. The numbers are not abstract to you. You live the numbers. 14 shillings a week, 1 shilling and 3p for rent, the rest for everything. The everything that never quite covers everything. The margin that is not quite a margin. Thomas puts down the paper. Good, you ask. There was a murder in Poplar, he says, which is how he announces interesting news, by leading with the dramatic headline and proceeding to context. Someone they've been looking for since August. Caught. Found him in the river, so in a manner of speaking. London's other method of closing cases. You put the pamphlets away. You sit with Thomas in the candle's narrowing circle of light. The paper between you, the fire down to embers, the sounds of the building settling around you, the baby next door, the footsteps above, the particular squeak of the third stair from the bottom, which announces anyone coming up or down, and which you've heard so many times it has become invisible, audible again only when you think specifically about it. I'm going somewhere Tuesday evening, you say. He looks up. The League, you say. The Malthusian League. They have meetings. Agnes might come too. He looks at you for a moment with an expression that is doing several things at once, slightly uncertain, slightly, not threatened exactly, but aware that you are doing something he doesn't quite understand the shape of yet. And underneath that, something that is not quite pride but is adjacent to it, an acknowledgement. All right, he says. I'll be back by 9. Mrs. Briggs can have the children. I'll be here, he says. Mrs. Briggs doesn't need to. You'll be here. I'll be here, he says, with a slight edge of certainty that means he means it, means he is making it deliberate, the being here, the holding the fort on a Tuesday evening. You nod. Thank you, you say. He goes back to the paper. You bank the fire for the night. The candle goes out. Sunday passes. Monday the shop needs stocking, and there is laundry that didn't dry properly in Saturday's damp, and needs another day on the line. And Eleanor has a sniffly nose that you watch with the vigilance of a woman who has learned that colds in small children are not automatically trivial in 1887, when doctors cost money and whooping cough is not a theoretical risk. The sniffly nose is just a sniffly nose, it seems, but you watch it. Monday evening, Agnes knocks. She's wearing her going-out coat and she has a piece of paper folded in her hand. She hands it to you when you open the door. It is the address and time of the Tuesday meeting, written in someone else's handwriting. A woman at the factory told me, Agnes says. She goes. She said it's not. She pauses, choosing words. She said it's sensible, practical, not strange. I didn't think it would be strange, you say. Neither did I, Agnes says, and her tone of voice makes clear that she did think it might be strange and wanted the reassurance. Tuesday. Thomas comes home at the usual time, eats the soup you've made, plays with the children, puts Eleanor to bed. By the time you need to leave at 6:30, he's sitting at the table with Alfie, the two of them in some complicated negotiation about the tile that you do not have time to understand. You put on your coat, your hat, the respectable combination. Don't stay up too late, you tell Thomas. I'll be fine, he says, which is not an answer to what you said, but is also fine. You go downstairs. Agnes is waiting in the court outside, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. Ready? You say. No, she says, but let's go anyway. This is why you like Agnes. The journey north is familiar now, 2 days after you did it the first time. Borough High Street, London Bridge, the North Bank, the different texture of the city, the Strand. The room off the Strand is lit when you arrive. Other women already there, perhaps a dozen, seated on chairs arranged in a rough circle, most of them your age or a little older. A few older women, 40s and above. One woman who looks younger than you, perhaps 19. The woman at the desk from your first visit is there. She nods at you as if she remembers you, which she may or may not. She has probably seen many women pass through this room in the time the League has been running. Mrs. Crawford is a woman of about 50, tall, grey-haired, with the bearing of someone who has stood in rooms and said things and not apologised for it so many times that it has become natural. She has a quality of absolute composure, not coldness, just settledness. The composure of a person who has made their peace with what they are doing and is no longer interested in the question of whether they should be doing it. She leads the meeting. The meeting is, as Agnes's factory contact said, sensible, practical, not strange, except in the sense that all unusual things are strange the first time you encounter them. There is discussion, actual discussion, women asking questions and Mrs. Crawford answering them and other women adding to the answers, about methods, about the Rendells, about the douche, the syringe of antiseptic solution used after relations, which some women favour and some distrust, about the cap, which Mrs. Crawford explains is available, but must be fitted and currently costs more than most of them can afford, about withdrawal, the word actually said here in this room by Mrs. Crawford without embarrassment, noting its prevalence and its unreliability and the specific problem of dependence on another person's cooperation, about the safe period, which Mrs. Crawford discusses carefully, noting that current medical understanding is imperfect and advising against relying on it as a sole method. You sit in your chair and listen, and Agnes, beside you, is very still in the way she goes still when she's taking in information she finds important. A woman across the circle, late 30s, thin, with the look of someone on her 5th or 6th child, asks a question about the herbs, pennyroyal, tansy, ergot of rye, the things that were used before there was anything else, that are still used, that are bought from herbalists and herb sellers in markets and taken in quantities that range from ineffective to dangerous. Mrs. Crawford is careful about this. She does not dismiss the question. She does not pretend the herbs do not exist or are not used. She says, pennyroyal and tansy can act as emmenagogues, substances that promote menstruation, that can help bring on a delayed period in early pregnancy. She says, the dose required for this is very close to the dose that causes serious harm. She says, ergot of rye, which is a fungal infection of rye grain, was used by midwives for centuries to stimulate uterine contractions, and was also capable of causing severe poisoning and death. She says, the risks with these methods are not theoretical. The room is quiet while she says this. The woman with the thin face nods slowly, the nod of someone for whom this is confirmation of something she has suspected. Afterwards, the women talk among themselves. The circle breaks into smaller conversations. You find yourself speaking to a woman named Margaret, 42, 7 children, the oldest 18, who tells you she has been using the Rendells for 4 years and has not been pregnant in 4 years, and this is, she says, the single most significant thing that has happened to her since her youngest was born. I sleep now, she says. This sounds simple. It is not simple. I sleep. I don't lie awake counting. I don't wake up checking myself. I sleep. You understand what she means by counting. You understand what she means by checking. Does your husband? You start. He knows, she says. He doesn't ask about the details, but he knows something's different, and he's grateful too, though he'd never put it that way. The money's easier. I'm easier. We're better. Better. A small word for a large thing. Agnes has found her factory contact, a woman named Irene, and they are deep in conversation on the other side of the room. Agnes has her notebook out. She carried a notebook which tells you something about how seriously she was taking this. You accept a cup of tea from someone, weak and slightly stewed but hot, and you stand near the window and look at the street below. The Strand at 7:30 on a Tuesday, still busy, still the city in all its density and indifference, moving past below you. A woman walks past on the pavement, elegant, a man beside her, both of them going somewhere with the particular forward momentum of people who have somewhere good to be. She's wearing a fur collar. The gas lamp catches it as she passes. You think about her, that woman, or a woman like her, in a house in a respectable part of London. What does she have that you don't? More money, obviously, a larger household, a servant or two, a husband in a profession, a physician she sees regularly, who knows her name, who might, if she is fortunate and if her physician is forward-thinking, be willing to discuss her options with her. She might have the cap, fitted by the physician, the rubber diaphragm that is more reliable than the sponge pessary, better designed to stay in place to cover the cervix properly. She almost certainly has her husband's cooperation more reliably, or rather, her husband has more to lose from an unwanted pregnancy. The social consequences in their circle are more immediately relevant to his reputation and finances, and so the male contribution to prevention is more forthcoming. She may have had fewer pregnancies to begin with, partly because of these resources and partly because of the specific dynamics of marital relations in households where women have more standing. The historian does not have to speculate too wildly about this. The birth rate differentials between classes in Victorian England are documented. By the 1880s, middle and upper class families averaged 3 to 4 children. Working class families average 6 to 8. The differential is not explained by desire, it is explained by access. She also does not have to be afraid of the same things you are afraid of. If something goes wrong, if she becomes pregnant and her health is at risk, she has a physician. A proper physician, not a midwife in a back room. She has hospital access if needed. She has, in short, the cushion of money between her and the worst outcomes. You do not have that cushion. What you have is the Rendell's and the pamphlet and Mrs. Crawford's meeting and Agnes's notebook and the knowledge that you went and found out what was available and you are using it. It is not nothing. In fact, it is extraordinary how much it is not nothing. Because here is the arithmetic you have not done yet. The arithmetic that is not about shillings. The average working-class woman in England in 1887 is pregnant or nursing for roughly 15 years of her adult life. 15 years. From her early 20s to her late 30s, a more or less continuous state of pregnancy, or its immediate aftermath, broken by short intervals that are themselves consumed by the possibility of the next pregnancy. 15 years in which your body is not quite your own. 15 years in which everything is managed around what your body is doing, what it might do next, what it will require of you. 15 years in which the energy that might go to other things, to reading, to meetings, to conversations with women in rooms off the Strand, is consumed by the simple biological fact of continuous reproduction. And then, past the reproductive years, the exhaustion, the specific exhaustion that Margaret with her 7 children knows, that Mrs. Novak knows, that your mother knows, that is not merely the exhaustion of aging, but the exhaustion of a body that has done enormous work for a very long time. The woman with the fur collar does not have 15 years of this. She has perhaps 5, perhaps 6. She's freed, relatively, by the resources that give her access to the methods that work, and the physician who fits the cap and the husband who cooperates. She goes to concerts. You know this the way you know things about a different class of life, abstractly, through the newspapers that come your way second-hand, through the occasional window glimpse of a different kind of evening. She goes to concerts and lectures, and she reads, and she has what might be called, if you are being careful with the word, some leisure. You would like some leisure. You're 24 years old and you're going to a meeting on a Tuesday evening, and this is your leisure, which you are spending on acquiring practical information about contraception, and you are grateful for it. You are genuinely grateful. You're not being ironic. But you would also like, someday, the leisure that does not have a purpose, the kind that is just air. Just time that is yours, not organised around the children's schedule or the shopping or the meeting where you learn things you need to know. Someday. Mrs. Crawford announces that the meeting is closing. She gives a short summary of the practical points discussed. She does this efficiently, no sentimentality. The list of methods and their reliability and where they can be obtained, a practical closing that treats the assembled women as adults capable of using information, and thanks everyone for attending. She also mentions that the League has a lending library of pamphlets and books that members can access, and that the subscription remains 6pence a year, and that the next meeting is in a fortnight. You pay your 6pence on the way out. Agnes pays hers beside you. On the street heading for the omnibus stop, Agnes is quiet for a moment. Well, she says. Yes, you say. Margaret, Agnes says. The one with 7 children. I know. She slept. You understand exactly what Agnes means by this. Yes, you say. You get the omnibus south. London Bridge. Bermondsey. The familiar street. The familiar building. Thomas in the kitchen when you come in, the fire still going, the sound of both children asleep in the relative quiet of the other side of the curtain. Thomas looks up. Good? He asks. Yes, you say. Good. And you mean it. The weeks that follow have a different quality than the weeks before. Not dramatic, not transformed. The 14 shillings a week does not change. The room does not expand. The nausea of the morning, which is this pregnancy's persistence, continues until 9 weeks and then begins to ease, the slow retreat of the first trimester into the relative steadiness of the second, the body's peculiar gift of making the thing more bearable once you've committed to it. But there is something underneath the days that was not there before. A resource, a tool, the package in the drawer, waiting for after. The knowledge of the meetings, the fortnightly meetings that you attend when you can manage Tuesday evenings, which is not every fortnight but often enough. The conversations with Agnes, who has become more fully a friend since the League, who now comes to sit in the kitchen on Saturday afternoons sometimes while the children play and Judith plays with them. A compact, serious little presence who and Alfie have formed the kind of solemn alliance that 2 serious small children sometimes form with each other, based apparently on mutual recognition of seriousness. You are becoming something. You do not name it yet. You're 24 years old and pregnant for the 3rd time and living in 2 rooms in Bermondsey. And the naming of it would be excessive, would be theatrical. But you are becoming something. You can feel the shape of it. It is a person who knows what is available, who is part of a network of knowing, who went to a brass-plated office off the Strand and sat in a circle of women and heard the information said plainly. Who is going to manage this differently than the way it has been managed until now? Spring comes. The cold lifts in degrees, the way it always does in London, not all at once, but in the accumulated small mercies of slightly warmer mornings, slightly longer light in the evenings, the first week in March when you can wash the windows and actually see the light coming through them afterward. Clear and pale and useful. Your body grows. The third pregnancy proceeds in the way that pregnancies proceed, which is to say relentlessly, with its own schedule and its own logic and complete indifference to anything you have arranged in your life around it. The midwife who attended Eleanor, a Mrs. Pierce, who lives 4 streets away, and has been attending women in this neighbourhood for 20 years, with the calm competence of someone who has seen enough to know what is serious and what is not, comes to see you in the 5th month. She takes stock. She makes assessments. She tells you things are progressing normally, which in her vocabulary means no sign of the things that kill. How old are the other 2? She asks. 3 and 18 months. She nods. Something in her face, not judgment, but an accounting. Close together. Yes. Are you going to manage these intervals? You look at her. She looks at you. I intend to, you say. Something in her face shifts slightly. The same shift you have seen before, in Mrs. Briggs, in Agnes, in Mrs. Crawford at the League. A recognition. Not pride exactly. More like acknowledgement. Like you have said the correct word in a language she speaks, and she's noting that you speak it too. Good, she says. See that you do. She's not going to say more than that. She's a midwife, not a physician, and she operates in the grey space between what is legal and what is said, and she has been doing so for 20 years, and she's not going to create complications for herself by being specific. But she knows, and you know she knows. The Rendels, you say, because it costs nothing to be explicit with her. She nods. Use it properly, with the solution. The timing matters. A pause. Come to me if you're ever uncertain, before you go anywhere else. Before you go anywhere else. The meaning is clear. There is a before. The chemist's shop, the League's pamphlets, the things that are legal and manageable and available. There is an elsewhere, where Susan Mears went, where countless women go, the back rooms and the unnamed procedures and the outcomes that fill the blank spaces in the death statistics. She's telling you, come to her first. She is telling you that she has more to offer than the attending of births. She is not saying it directly. She will never say it directly. But she is a woman who has attended 20 years of women's bodies, and she knows what happens when the options run out, and she is offering carefully the possibility that the options need not run out. Thank you, you say. Look after yourself, she says, and puts on her coat and goes. Summer. The summer of 1887 is Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. 50 years on the throne. London celebrates this with the specific exuberance of a city that is good at celebration. Street parties and bunting and illuminations and a procession through the city on June 21st that brings out crowds of a density that even London has rarely managed. You take Alfie. You do not take Eleanor, who is too young and who has developed a fierce relationship with the concept of going to sleep at 7 o'clock, which is incompatible with Jubilee Street parties. Mrs. Briggs takes Eleanor for the evening. You take Alfie's hand and you join the crowd. Bermondsey's own celebration is on the long street near the market, where bunting has been strung between the lampposts and trestle tables set up with sandwiches and cakes that the street committee has been organising for weeks. The mood is something you've not encountered in exactly this form before. A collective warmth, a shared lifting of something, a shared occasion that makes the ordinary texture of the street into something different, something that acknowledges its own existence and finds it worth celebrating. You sit on a bench with Alfie in your lap, his small back against your chest, your arms around him, and watch the street. He is very wide awake. "Why is everyone here?" he asks. "Because it's the Queen's birthday, sort of. She's been Queen for 50 years. Has she?" He absorbs this. Is she old? 68. He considers this enormous number. Are you 68? I am 24. Oh, a pause. That's not as many. No. The street is lit with candles and a few paraffin lamps, and it makes the faces around you warm and golden and slightly unreal. Everyone in their best clothes, the children with their hair brushed into unusual neatness, the whole neighbourhood performing a version of itself that is cleaned up and presented, the way the neighbourhood knows it is capable of being, even if it rarely manages it. You are 6 months pregnant. You're large enough that getting comfortable on any surface is a negotiation, and the bench is a particular challenge. But you have shifted until something approaching comfort is achieved. Alfie a warm weight in front of you, your hands crossed over him. You think for a moment about Victoria. Not the Queen exactly, not the institution, not the empire, but the woman who has also been pregnant. 9 times, in fact. Victoria, who had 9 children, who had an opinion about the physical toll of childbirth that was not a diplomatic one, and was shared in letters that are now in archives. Who wrote to her daughter, Vicky, after Vicky's first child, "What you say of the unhappy lot of being a woman and being obliged to suffer so, I can only agree. 9 children and an unhappy lot." Victoria had the best medical care in England, and she still considered pregnancy an unhappy lot and said so. And she was the most powerful woman in the world. You think about what that means. If the most powerful woman in the world, with unlimited access to every resource available, with a beloved husband who by all accounts genuinely cooperated, found 9 pregnancies a burden she did not hesitate to call burdensome, then what exactly was the expectation for women whose resources were 14 shillings a week and 2 rooms in Bermondsey? The expectation was silence. The expectation was endurance. The expectation was a specific and comprehensive silence about the body and what it cost to live in one, and what one might reasonably want in the way of relief from the labour of continuous reproduction. You sit on your bench at the Jubilee Street party with Alfie's warm weight in your arms and the baby kicking against your ribs. A strong kick, definite, the kick of someone who has opinions already. And you think about silence and its opposite. The pamphlets, Mrs. Crawford's room, the meeting on Tuesdays, Agnes's notebook, Margaret who sleeps now, the woman at the desk who said, "Take all of them you like." The opposite of silence, not loud, not dramatic, practical, specific, passed from hand to hand, said in rooms to women who needed to hear it. The opposite of silence that is also not quite speech is still in the space between. The euphemism of the chemist's shop, the implication of the League's careful language, the sidelong conversations of women at markets, but moving towards speech, slowly, in the direction of a world where this can be said plainly. Alfie falls asleep against you somewhere in the middle of the second hour, which is a mercy because you can now readjust to a slightly more sustainable position, and you sit in the warm summer evening while Bermondsey celebrates 50 years of Victoria, and you wait for the baby to kick again. She does, strong, definite. Hello, you think. All right, we're managing. The baby arrives in September, a girl as it turns out. As Mrs. Pierce expected, she claimed to be able to tell and you did not quite believe her, but she was right. A girl, 8 pounds, arriving at 4 in the morning after a labour that begins at 9 the previous evening and proceeds with the inexorable logic of all labours, which is to say that it proceeds on its own terms and your job is primarily to survive it. Mrs. Pierce is there the whole time. She is calm in the specific way of someone who has presided over 200 of these and knows what is normal and what is not, and can tell the difference in the first 5 minutes. She keeps Thomas out of the way, which is the correct decision, and she manages the room, which means she manages you, with the quiet authority of long experience. The baby arrives. She cries immediately, which is the thing you wait for, the thing that has a different quality of sound from anything else. The first specific cry of a new person who has not existed before this moment and will not cease existing now. You hold her. She's dark-haired, flushed, her face the particular crumpled, serious face of very new persons, her hands making the grasping motions of someone who is not yet sure what hands are for but suspects they will be useful. You look at her for a long time. She'll need a name, Mrs. Pierce says, a practical woman to the last. We've got one, you say. You have talked about names, in the evenings, in the small kitchen, while the autumn came down over London and the pregnancy moved through its final months. Thomas wanted his mother's name, Margaret, which is also the name of the woman from the League's meeting who told you she could sleep now, and you thought that was 2 good reasons. Margaret, you tell Mrs. Pierce. She nods as if approving, though she is approving the name, not the reasons for it, which she doesn't know. Still, the name is there. Margaret. Alfie sees her the next morning. He approaches the drawer, the wardrobe drawer padded again with old coat, with extreme caution of someone approaching a phenomenon he does not fully understand the rules of. He looks at her for a long time. Is she going to do something, he asks finally. She's mostly going to sleep and eat for a while, you say. Oh, he continues looking. She's very small. You were that small? He finds this genuinely surprising, as if the connection between his own infant past and this current infant had not occurred to him. He looks at her again with new interest, recalibrating. Did you keep me? He asks. You look at him. Of course I kept you. He accepts this, satisfied, and goes back to his tile, which has been joined by additional found objects over the months, and now constitutes a modest collection of interesting pavement finds that live on the windowsill in a line. Eleanor's response to Margaret is more direct. She toddles over to the drawer, looks in, extends one finger, and touches Margaret's cheek very gently, and then withdraws, and goes to do something else. Assessment complete. Life continues. Thomas holds her that evening. He holds her with the particular careful competence of a man who has held babies before, his big tallow-rough hands cradling her head with an attention that is something to see in a man who is otherwise not demonstrative, who expresses most things practically and rarely through gesture. He looks at her for a long time. He says nothing. He hands her back to you. She's good, he says, which covers everything he wants to say, and you both understand that, and it is enough. The weeks after birth. You know this time. You've been here twice before. The specific exhaustion that is different from the exhaustion of pregnancy, which is a bone-deep physical demand, the body redirecting all the resources toward the sustained effort of another person's development. This exhaustion is different, sharper, more immediate, The exhaustion of interrupted sleep in intervals measured in 2-hour units, the exhaustion of continuous feeding, the body's particular depletion in the early weeks of nursing. But you also know that it passes. You know with the specific knowledge of someone doing this for the 3rd time that the worst of the fog lifts at about 6 weeks, that by 8 weeks the intervals of sleep lengthen, that by 12 weeks something approaching a schedule begins to assert itself. You know this and you wait for it. You also know something else this time that you did not know the previous times. You know that this is the last time you're going to be here in exactly this way. Recovering from a birth, managing a newborn, running a household, looking at the arithmetic of it all. Not the last time in the sense that nothing difficult will happen again. The last time in the sense of you're not going to be here again 3 or 4 years from now with a 4th baby in the drawer. This is not arrogance. You know the Rendells is not perfect. You know the 10% that Mrs. Crawford noted. You know that things happen, but you also know that you're going to be as careful can be, with everything available to you, and that the difference between careful and not careful has been measured in this room, in this city, across the years of women you have known and watched. The difference is Margaret versus Mrs. Novak. The difference is sleeping versus not sleeping. The difference is sometimes alive versus not alive. Susan Mears, 26 years old, February last year. Margaret in the drawer breathing. You will be as careful can be. 6 weeks after the birth, Mrs. Pierce comes again. She examines you with the same clinical competence she brings to everything. She confirms you are healing as expected. She asks about feeding, sleep, the children. Before she leaves, she turns at the door. The other matter, she says. Yes, you say. 6 weeks is usually... She pauses. 6 weeks and everything is as it should be. You should wait until then. She's not asking a question. She is giving information. Specific, practical information from a midwife who attends the births of working-class women in Bermondsey and knows exactly what happens between births when women don't have what they need. I know, you say. Good. She buttons her coat. Mrs. Hadley, she says, and there's something in the way she says your name. Formal, deliberate. You're a sensible woman, which is the highest compliment a practical woman can give another practical woman in 1887, and you receive it as such. Thank you, you say. She leaves. Margaret wakes in the drawer and announces it with the vocal commitment of a person who considers silence inadequate. You go to her. You pick her up. She is heavier already than last week. The specific satisfying weight of a baby who's feeding well and growing as she should. All right, you say. I'm here. She's not particularly reassured by this, but she accepts it as a start and makes her demands slightly less vocal while you settle with her in the chair by the window. The window in September. The light is different now than in January, lower and more golden. The specific quality of early autumn light in London before the cold smoke of winter reasserts itself and dulls everything back to grey. The court below, women coming and going to the standpipe, a child running, the cat from next door occupying the sunny patch near the building's front door with an air of permanent entitlement. London in September. You've been here almost 5 years. You know this city now, not completely. No one knows London completely. The city is too large for complete knowledge. It absorbs generations of people and gives back partial understanding, the specific knowledge of the streets you use and the faces you recognize, and the sounds you've memorized. But well enough to navigate, well enough to know where to go, well enough to know which streets to avoid and which chemist's shop near the Strand and which Tuesday meeting, well enough to have built something here, not what you would call a grand life, not the life of the woman with the fur collar on the Strand, but something, a household, a set of children who are fed and growing, a husband who puts his hand on your arm, a neighbour who lends pamphlets, a friend who carries a notebook to the meeting, a midwife who calls you sensible, a small network of knowing. That is what you have built, without planning it, without naming it, simply by going where the information was and coming back. Margaret is quieter now. She has the slightly unfocused gaze of a well-fed newborn, the gaze that is not quite directed at anything and is yet completely present, wholly here in the specific moment of being a new person who has not yet learned to distinguish the layers of the world. Here's what you should know, you say to her, quietly, because Alfie and Eleanor are napping and Thomas is at work and there is, for this moment, only this room and this baby and the September light. She does not look directly at you. She looks in the direction of the light. You should know what's available, you say, what can be known. You should know where to go to find out and not be frightened to go and not be ashamed of going. She does not indicate that she has absorbed this information. The rest can wait, you say, but that's the one. Margaret makes a sound. It is possibly agreement. It is probably gas. You settle her against your shoulder. The city outside makes its city sounds. The standpipe, the cart on the street, the cat deciding to move on. The afternoon comes in through the window. It will be winter again soon. The coal smoke, the cold basin, the arithmetic of keeping warm on what is available. Alfie's growing feet and Eleanor's growing everything, and Margaret's particular newness added to the mix. You will manage it. You have managed everything else. And next Tuesday, if Mrs. Briggs can have the children, you will go to the meeting. Because there is more to know. There is always more to know. Mrs. Crawford's meeting has been discussing the cap, the rubber diaphragm that is more reliable, that costs more, that requires fitting, but that some of the women in the circle have managed to access. You want to know about that. You want to know what exactly is available and what the route to it is and what it costs and whether it can be managed on 14 shillings a week. The answer might be no. The answer might be not yet, not at this income, not without saving for several months. But you want to know. Knowledge is, this is the thing you've understood this year more clearly than before. Knowledge is itself something, not just useful, not just instrumental, something in its own right, the having of it, the capacity it confers, to know that the Rendell's exists, and to have it in the drawer, and to know how to use it, and to know where to get more when the supply is done. That knowledge is a kind of possession that 14 shillings a week cannot take away from you. It is yours. It does not appear in the rent book or the food budget or any of the arithmetic. It is not taxable. It cannot be pawned. It is information, specific, practical, available, and you have it. Margaret shifts against your shoulder. The September afternoon deepens. Outside the city breathes. Inside this room, this particular light, this quiet between one sound and the next. You hold your daughter. You close your eyes for a moment. Not sleep. You cannot sleep now. Eleanor will wake any moment, and then Alfie will wake, and then the afternoon will begin again in earnest. But something like it. The brief rest of a body that has done what it needed to do and can, for 30 seconds, not do anything. 30 seconds, you take them. The city breathes. The baby breathes. You breathe. And then Eleanor wakes up and says "Mamma" with the certainty of someone who expects to be heard, and the afternoon begins. This is what you need to understand about Victorian contraception, not as a list of methods in a textbook, not as a case study in medical history, as what it was, a body of knowledge carried by women, moving between women, through the specific channels women create when the official channels are closed to them, through the meeting on Tuesdays, through the pamphlet under the household papers, through Agnes's notebook and Mrs. Pierce's careful phrasing, and Mrs. Crawford's matter-of-fact summaries, through the woman at the Malthusian League's desk who said, "Take all of them you like." It was not perfect knowledge. The rhythm method was wrong. The safe period was wrong. The Rendel's was 90% and not 100. The cap required access that most women did not have. The herbs were dangerous in proportion to how effective they were. But it was knowledge. Moving. Against resistance. Against law. Against the comprehensive, organised silence of a society that had decided women should not know. And because it moved, things changed. The birth rate began to fall, slowly, through the 1880s, through the 1890s, into the 20th century, not because of any law, not because any government passed any bill, because women found out what was available and used it. By 1900, the average working-class family had 4 children. By 1910, it had 3. By 1920, after the first great catastrophe of the century, the notion of controlling family size was sufficiently mainstream that when Marie Stopes opened her clinic in 1921, it was vandalised and protested. But it opened, and stayed open, and was followed by others. The knowledge kept moving. It is still moving. The particular form of it changes. The rubber goods are replaced by oral contraception, by IUDs, by injectable methods, by implants, by things that would be incomprehensible to a woman in a room in Bermondsey in 1887. But the principle of a woman knowing what is available to her body and using what is available, that does not change. It does not change because the need does not change, which is the thing that Victorian England understood imperfectly, and understood even worse the further up the social order you went. The need is not historical. The need is not Victorian. It is not a function of poverty, or the tallow works, or the 14 shillings a week. The woman with the fur collar on the Strand also had a body, also had the arithmetic of what she could carry, also had, underneath the silk and the better nutrition, and the physician who came to her house, the same fundamental human reckoning. It is the human reckoning. What is this body for? What do I want it to do? What do I have the capacity to take on? And what is beyond me, and who gets to decide? The answer to who gets to decide is, ideally, the person in the body. Victorian England had mixed views on this. 2026 has mixed views on this. The meeting goes on. The knowledge keeps moving. Margaret in the drawer breathing. The city outside the window breathing. You, holding the thread of it, passing it on when the time comes. This is how it works. This is how it has always worked. One woman at a time, one Tuesday meeting, one package wrapped in brown paper, 1 shilling and 9, no eye contact, no explanation needed, and thank you and good morning and the door behind you. The light is going now. October coming for September's light. The way it always does, the way the year move whether you watch it or not. You get up. You settle Margaret back in her drawer. You wake Eleanor with the gentleness of long practice. You call to Alfie through the curtain. You go to the range and start the supper. The evening is beginning. The long domestic evening that will not end until after 10. after the children are all settled and Thomas is home and the small kitchen is cleaned and the fire is banked. You are tired. You will be tired for years. This is the honest truth of it. The specific fatigue of parenthood in a working-class household in 1887 does not lift. It changes shape. It is not always the same shape, and some shapes are more bearable than others. But tired is the baseline. You know this. You have made your peace with it. What you have now that you did not have in January, 8 months ago, a different version of the same woman, is the package in the drawer and the knowledge in your head and the Malthusian League's rooms off the Strand and Mrs. Pierce who calls you sensible and Agnes with her notebook and the meetings on Tuesdays. You have a plan, imperfect, made of available materials subject to the 10% and the arithmetic and all the other forces that shape a life in London in 1887. But a plan. Yours. The onions go in the pan. They sizzle. Alfie comes round the curtain dragging his blanket and begins immediately to tell you something about Eleanor. Eleanor appears 3 seconds later with her own version of the same events. The stories do not entirely agree. You listen to both of them. This is also part of it. The everything that constitutes a day. The onions and the blanket and the versions of events that don't match, and the fire that needs feeding, and the baby who will wake again in an hour. This is what you are managing the arithmetic for. This, exactly this. The evening begins, years will pass. Margaret Hadley, born September 1887, will grow up in 2 rooms in Bermondsey. She will be better fed than she might have been if she had a 4th or 5th sibling competing for the same 14 shillings a week. She will go to school until 13, which is more school than many children of her circumstance. She will have a mother who is not depleted in the way that Mrs. Novak's mother was depleted, who has some left over, who reads sometimes in the evenings and goes to meetings on Tuesdays. She will grow up knowing that her mother knew things and sought things and found things out. She will not know the specifics until she is older. She will not know about the drawer and the pamphlets and the Tuesday meeting until she needs to know, at which point she will be told, because her mother has decided that this is how it works. This is what gets passed on. By the time Margaret needs this information, by the 1910s, the 1920s, it will be slightly more available than it was in 1887. Not easy. Not free of stigma. Not complete. The Comstock laws still operate in America, restricting information through the post. In England, the Obscene Publications Act still stands. Marie Stopes's first book will be refused by a dozen publishers before it finds one. The struggle is not over, but it is further along because of the meetings, because of the pamphlets, because of the women who went to the League and sat in the circle and asked the questions and wrote things down in notebooks and went home and told their daughters. Because of the chain. Margaret will know where to go. She will go. She will come back with what she needs. The chain will hold. This is enough to know. The supper cooks. The children eat. Thomas comes home. The family that is the right size for what is available. Not the only possible family. Not the final answer to the question of what a family should be, but the family that can be managed, this family, yours, gathers at the table. The evening is ordinary. The evening is everything. Outside, London breathes. Still breathing. 5 million people in their 5 million lives. The extraordinary machinery of it. The ships on the river, and the gas lamps being lit along the streets, and the Malthusian League's rooms off the Strand, where the lamp is burning in the window, and the woman at the desk is arranging pamphlets for the next Tuesday's attendees. Take all of them you like. All of them. you like. The fire in the range pops and settles. Margaret sleeps in her drawer. Alfie pushes peas around his plate. Eleanor eats with both hands, which she has decided is more efficient. Thomas talks about something at the works. You listen. You are here. You're tired and you are here, and this is what you've built, and it is worth what it cost. You're 24 years old and you have all of October, November and December ahead of you, and then next year and the year after, and the arithmetic will be tight, and the room will be small, and the coal will run low in February as it always does, and the standing in the queue at the standpipe will be cold in January, and it will all continue. But you will also continue, and you know where to go when you need to know something, and that specific, small, enormous thing is yours. The fire, the children, the evening, the city breathing outside. You close your eyes for just a second. Not sleep. Not yet. But the place near sleep, the border country where everything slows, the sounds of the room fade to background. The specific weight of tiredness settles into your bones like something that has been waiting all day to sit down. Tomorrow's Wednesday, market day. The arithmetic of it already assembled in the back of your mind, the prices and the priorities and the judgments that constitute the management of a household on what is available. The mutton is good value this week, the carrots are cheap, the bread, but that is tomorrow, tonight. The fire, the children, Thomas's voice, the baby's breathing from the drawer, the particular steady sound of it. All of this, held together by the daily work of it, the daily love of it, the thing you do not name because it does not need a name, it only needs doing. You open your eyes. Eleanor has put food in her hair, which is an interesting choice. You attend to Eleanor's hair. The evening continues, and later, much later, when the children are finally all asleep and Thomas is in bed and the fire is low and the room is quiet, you sit for 5 minutes at the kitchen table in the dark, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting, just breathing, the city outside breathing too. The two of you, the city and the woman in the kitchen, breathing together in the January dark, September dark, the October coming, the way you have breathed together every night of your life here. Margaret's breathing from the drawer, Eleanor's from behind the curtain, Alfie's deeper, steadier, Thomas's, the long, slow rhythm of a man who's done a day's work and can rest now. All of them, breathing together, the small specific sound of this household at rest. You are warm, you are fed, you are safe for tonight. You know what you need to know. You have what you went to find. Tomorrow will come with all of it. The market, the arithmetic, the children's needs, the everything of it. But tomorrow is tomorrow. Tonight is tonight. You get up. You go to bed. You pull the blanket up. The last sound you hear before sleep is Margaret in her drawer. One small sound, the involuntary sound of a sleeping person shifting. Nothing more. She is here. She is well. She's enough. You close your eyes. The darkness comes. Not frightening, just dark. Centuries will pass. The room in Bermondsey will be demolished eventually, rebuilt into something unrecognisable. The tallow works will close. The standpipe in the court will be replaced by indoor plumbing, which will seem like a miracle and will eventually seem simply normal, the way everything that seemed like a miracle eventually seems simply normal. The chain of women will keep going. Annie Besant to the meeting, to the pamphlet, to Mrs. Briggs, to you, and from you someday, in words or without words, to Margaret as Eleanor and the women they will become, and from them to their daughters if they have daughters, the knowledge passing on the way. Knowledge passes when the official channels are closed. Sideways, privately, one woman at a time, the law will change, slowly, in the direction of the woman in the kitchen with the right to know what is available. The clinic will open and stay open, and others will follow. The chain will hold. People will still live here, still make the same reckoning, still lie in bed in the dark and count, still get up in the morning and do what needs doing and manage the arithmetic of what they can carry. Some things don't change. The human need doesn't change. The human want to live, to make something, to hold what you love without losing yourself entirely in the holding, that doesn't change. And the rest at the end of the day, the particular mercy of it, that doesn't change either. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Mary Ellen Hadley in her kitchen in Bermondsey, in the dark after the children were settled and the day was done and she had done what she needed to do. Let the city fade. Let the arithmetic go quiet. Let the thinking slow and soften and finally, stop. You've done enough. You know enough. The rest is rest. Take it. Good night.